There were a dozen or so foreign beings waiting outside his cave abode, and at the forefront of the ground were 4 yellow-robed beings, all of whom were at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage. The rest of the group was comprised of armored warriors wielding long silver halberds, and all of them wore serious expressions on their faces. One of the yellow-robed men cupped his fist in a salute as soon as Han Li emerged from his cave abode, and said, "Fellow Taoist Han, we were given orders by Senior Qian Jizzi to take you to the meeting place where everyone has gathered." "I'll have to trouble you to lead the way then," Han Li replied in a calm manner. In the past, only very few of the most important beings in Cloud City were aware of the fact that he was the one who had activated the vast glacial badge. However, now that the opening of the vast glacial realm was imminent, many more people had most likely been made aware of this information. Qian Jizzi was naturally afraid that someone would try to kidnap or kill Han Li for their own objectives, which was why he deployed this group to accompany him to the meeting place. Yellow-robed man smiled upon hearing this before waving a hand toward the armored warriors behind him. The dozen or so armored warriors immediately parted to reveal a spirit carriage that was shimmering with azure light. The carriage was being drawn by a pair of gorgeous massive azure birds, and it was quite clear that this was no ordinary spirit carriage. Han Li strode forward and entered the carriage without a fuss, and the 4 yellow-robed beings also rose up into the air before descending onto the carriage. The 4 of them had clearly rehearsed this before, and they each landed on one corner of the spirit carriage to shield Han Li between them at the very center. The 2 azure birds let loose a few clear cries before spreading their wings, and they rose up into the air with the spirit carriage behind them. Meanwhile, each of the armored warriors summoned a silver disc, and they also rose up into the air atop these treasures. Moments later, the azure spirit carriage had reached an altitude of several thousand feet, and it was flying straight out of Cloud City. It was quite clear that the entire Cloud City was on high alert. Not only were there extremely few pedestrians on the streets, there were also many groups of armored warriors patrolling the city on the ground below, as well as in the air above. What Han Li also noticed was he could sense restriction fluctuations coming from some of the more important places in the city, as if all of the spell formations there had been activated. It appeared that the higher-ups of Cloud City really did regard the opening of this vast glacial realm as an extremely important event. The spirit carriage flew along without encountering any mishaps, taking Han Li directly to the inn where he'd first activated the vast glacial badge. At present, this area had been completely sealed off by layers upon layers of restrictions, and even from afar, several tens of giant pillars could be visible in these restrictions. These pillars were around 1,000 feet tall each, and they encircled the entire area in a radius of close to 10 kilometers around the inn. These pillars were all emanating spiritual lights of different colors, and they formed a 5-colored light barrier that made it impossible for anyone on the outside to see what lay inside. As soon as the carriage approached the area, Han Li could clearly tell that there were at least 10 times as many guards here than compared to other places. Almost the entire area had been surrounded by armored warriors, and there were also over 100 puppets present. These puppets were around 70 to 80 feet tall each, and some of them were as inky black while others were fiery red, and they'd also been deployed to various locations in the area. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. All of the guards here were at least of the core formation stage, and the majority of them were at the nascent soul stage. As for spatial tempering stage aura, even after just a quick inspection using his spiritual sense, Han Li had already discovered 2 or 3 in the nearby area, and this wasn't even taking into account the layers of restrictions that had been set up all around. To say that the defenses here were tight would be quite an understatement. The azure spirit carriage didn't appear to have any special features on it, but none of the guards stopped it along the way. Now that they were close to the light barrier, a few armored warriors riding atop steeds that appeared to be giant winged wolves flew out of the light barrier, heading directly toward Han Li's carriage. "General Tai, is fellow Taoist Han here?" An azure-armored man who appeared to be around 50 years of age asked from afar as he sat on his giant wolf steed. Senior Qian must have asked you to come and greet us, right, Brother Hua? Rest assured, fellow Taoist Han is sitting in the carriage, so you can open the restriction for us now." One of the yellow-robed men standing on the spirit carriage replied with a smile. "That's good to hear. I'll open the restriction right away." The azure-armored man nodded upon hearing this, following which he and a few other armored beings each summoned a restriction badge then waved them in unison toward the light barrier that they just emerged from. Pillars of light of different colors immediately shot forth from their badges before striking the light barrier and forming a light formation that was around 10 feet in size. The light barrier immediately swayed before a faint buzzing sound rang out, and an opening appeared on it before expanding to form a passageway. There was 5 colored lights swirling within the passageway, giving it quite a mysterious appearance, and the yellow-robed man who had spoken earlier immediately spurred on the giant azure birds, instructing them to lead the spirit carriage into the passageway. The silver-armored warriors behind them, and the wolf riders also hurried and followed suit. What appeared to be an ordinary passageway took the spirit carriage quite a long time to fly through, and Han Li rather surprised by how long it took to reach the other side. This indicated that there was a spatial restriction enclosed within the light barrier, and if an oblivious being were to try and sneak into the light barrier, they'd be temporarily trapped in there regardless of how profound their movement techniques were. As a result, there was no way that they'd be able to avoid being discovered during their infiltration attempt. Just as these thoughts were flashing through his mind, the azure spirit carriage emerged on the other side of the light barrier, and Han Li was greeted by the sight 2 massive formations down below, each of which had a radius of several hundred feet. There were countless fist-sized crystals embedded all over the surfaces of these formations, and a series of complex and profound patterns had been carved around the formation. All of these crystals and patterns were emanating faint spiritual light of different colors, creating quite an exuberant sight to behold from afar. Between the 2 formations, there was nothing else aside from a newly constructed hall that took up an area of several acres. There were humanoid figures all around the formations, as well as the massive hall, and there appeared to be thousands of beings present. Most of them were armored warriors who were on guard duty, while the remaining several hundreds of them all wore different attire. However, there was one constant, which was that all of them possessed advanced cultivation bases. Even though these people had surrounded the 2 formations and the hall, there was not even a single person who was speaking. However, as the azure spirit carriage that Han Li was in began to descend from above, many people down below still raised their heads to look up. The 4 yellow-robed men paid no heed to the widespread attention they were receiving, and they merely continued to drive the carriage, taking to a smooth landing on a plot of empty land that appeared to have been prepared specifically for this purpose. Han Li cast his gaze around him, and only then did he discover that there was another completely identical spirit carriage parked beside him, except that one was completely white in color. After the carriage had drawn to a stop, one of the yellow-robed men turned to Han Li as he cupped his fist in a polite salute, and said, "Fellow Taoist Han, Senior Qian Jizzi and all of the other seniors are waiting for you in the hall. We still have other matters to attend to, so we'll have to part ways with you here. Thank you for transporting me here, Brother Tai." Han Li also returned his salute with a smile. After that, his body swayed, and he slowly drifted down from the carriage, then made his way toward the hall in an unhurried manner after landing on the ground. The dozen or so armored warriors had witnessed Han Li disembarking from the spirit carriage, so they only appraised him with curiosity in their eyes, and refrained from stopping him to ask questions or conduct a search. Han Li was naturally quite glad to be spared the trouble, and entered the hall without a hitch. After passing through a corridor that was lined with armored warriors on both sides, he arrived in a spacious hall, within which were around 40 to 50 people, some of whom were standing while others were seated. At the center of the hall was a chair, upon which sat a white-robed man who appeared to be in his 20s. It was none other than the man with the Wang surname. Qian Jizzi, Duan Tianren, Kai Living, and 7 or 8 other holy race beings were also seated in various parts of the hall. Behind them were groups of beings from various different races, all of whom were at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage. As Han Li was walking into the hall, Qian Jizzi was in the process of saying something to the white-robed man with a smile on his face, while everyone else was listening in silence. However, everyone's attention was then immediately drawn to Han Li following his arrival. Han Li's heart jolted slightly at the sight of the white-robed man, but his expression remained calm as he extended a deep bow and said, "I pay my respects to all of the seniors present. I'm glad to see you're here as well, fellow Taoist Han. The vast glacial realm will be opening in a few hours, and I'll introduce you to your companions later," Qian Jizzi said with a smile. "Yes, senior." Han Li naturally wasn't going to state any objections here. The white-robed man glanced at Han Li, and he seemed to have noticed something as a hint of surprise had flashed through his eyes. He suddenly asked, "So you're the one who unintentionally activated the vast glacial badge?" "Indeed, Senior Wang," Han Li hurriedly replied with a respectful bow. "You recognize me?" The white-robed man was rather taken aback. "I had the honor of seeing you from afar during the 4 races auction, Senior," Han Li replied in a truthful manner. White-robed man appraised Han Li carefully for a moment before saying something that was quite unexpected to everyone. "The 4 races auction, eh? In that case, it seems we have some affinity with one another. I can see you're only a 7th-tier upper race being, but your magic power and spiritual sense are both several times more powerful than beings of the same cultivation base. I have a treasure that I unintentionally came across many years ago known as the Heavenly Astral Seal. Using it is quite taxing on one's magic power and spiritual sense, but it's very useful for beings below the holy race, so I think it'll be perfect for you." As soon as his voice trailed off, he swept sleeve through the air, and a shimmering silver object was immediately sent flying toward Han Li. Han Li initially faltered upon seeing this before a hint of elation welled up in his heart. He hurriedly expressed his gratitude before making a grabbing motion toward the oncoming object. A burst of azure light swept forth from his fingertips, enveloping the item before drawing it into his grasp. He then focused his gaze to discover that this was a small, antiquated silver seal that was around 5 to 6 inches in size. At the very bottom of the seal was inscribed a few pea-sized purple characters that read, "Heavenly Astral Seal," in a type of ancient text. This was an extremely rare text from ancient times, but thankfully, it was one that Han Li recognized from his extensive studies. Even though Han Li was quite surprised that a Grand Ascension stage being was giving him a present on their first official meeting, he naturally wasn't going to refuse it. At the same time, he was considering what reason the white-robed man could have for doing this. Everyone was also quite surprised to see this, and many of them began to exchange glances with one another. Just as everyone thought the white-robed man was going to say something else to Han Li, much to everyone's surprise, he simply leaned back and fell silent. Xianxia faltered slightly upon seeing this before quickly returning to his senses as he turned to Han Li with a smile. "You're vastly fortunate to be receiving a treasure from Senior Wang, fellow Taoist Han. With that treasure to protect you, you'll undoubtedly be a lot safer in the vast glacial realm. We don't have much time left, so let me introduce you to your companions first." "Thank you, Senior Qian," Han Li replied in a respectful manner. "First, let me introduce Fairy Yue to you. Just like you, she's also activated a vast glacial badge, and she'll be taking another team into the vast glacial realm. There's a very slim chance that your 2 teams will be teleported into the same area in the vast glacial realm, but if you happen to bump into one another, make sure to look out for each other." Xianxia began as he gestured toward a woman with a remarkably pale face, wearing a blue palatial dress. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Fairy Yue." Han Li took a quick glance at this woman, yet found himself unable to identify what race she hailed from. In any case, he still smiled and cupped his fist in a polite salute. The woman merely nodded in an indifferent manner, without saying anything in response. "This is Shi Kun of the Stone Cocoon race. He possesses some of the most powerful defensive abilities among all of you. Those 2 are the twins from the Azure race, Feng Zio and Yun Teng. They're very adept at fighting enemies together." Xianxia introduced all of the beings in the hall who were at the spatial tempering stage to Han Li one by one, only giving brief introductions without going into any great depth. As such, all of the introductions were completed quite quickly. In the face of a 7th-tier upper race being like Han Li, most of them either displayed no reaction or appraised him with cold expressions. Only a few people regarded him with smiles on their faces. This was no surprise to Han Li. After all, these were all 9th-tier upper race beings, and if they were to make one more breakthrough, they'd be able to reach the holy race. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been chosen to enter the vast glacial realm. As such, it only made sense that they wouldn't pay much heed to an outsider who was only a 7th-tier upper race being. He had been praised by the white-robed man in person earlier, but that only indicated that he was using some special cultivation arts. At the very least, that was what many of them were thinking. Xianxia's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. Everyone else is oblivious to this, but he knew that Han Li had once slain several beings of the same cultivation base as himself with ease. Perhaps he couldn't completely dominate all of these beings present, but he was definitely powerful enough to at least be among the top 3. However, Han Li didn't seem to mind the treatment that he was receiving, and he nodded to acknowledge these beings one by one as they were being introduced. Kai Living and Duan Tianren's disciples were both among these beings, and that Shi Kun from the stone cocoon race was none other than Duan Tianren's disciple. According to Kai and Jizzy, the hooded woman who was Kai Living's disciple was called Liu Shuyer. In the past, each vast glacial badge could only take 13 beings into the vast glacial realm, but after making some improvements to the teleportation formation with the assistance of some formation masters from the crystal race, each badge can now facilitate the teleportation of 15 people. Hence, all 30 of you will be entering the vast glacial realm. That's all the introductions I have to make. Let me split you into your teams now. The names I call out from here will go with Fairy Yue, while the rest will go with fellow Taoist Han, Hai Sha, Feng Zio. Thus, Kai and Jizzy began to rattle off a list of names. Not long after that, everyone had been split up into two groups, one of which stood behind Han Li, while the other stood behind the woman in the blue dress. Han Li's expression remained calm and unchanged, but internally, he was wondering what kind of strings Kai Living and Duan Tianren had pulled behind the scenes to get Kai and Jizzy to assign Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun to his team. Both of them wore calm expressions, as if they'd never seen Han Li before this. As such, it appeared that he had no choice but to take a trip to those ruins in the vast glacial realm. After the two teams had been assigned, an unfamiliar holy race being rose to his feet before disclosing to Han Li and the others matters that they had to be careful of in the vast glacial realm. Even though Han Li and the others had already heard this information more than once from other sources, they still listened with rapt focus, just in case there was something that they'd missed in the past. After finishing his address, the holy race being stepped aside again, and Kai and Jizzy waved a sleeve through the air, sending a burst of white light sweeping out from within. 50 to 60 treasures of different sizes then appeared in midair in a flash. These treasures came in all shapes and forms, including things like rings, bowls, flags, canes. However, the most common types of treasures, such as flying swords and flying sabers, were nowhere to be seen. Everyone looked on at the diverse array of treasures up ahead with bewilderment in their eyes. Some of them turned to Kai and Jizzy and opened their mouths as if they were about to ask some questions, but right at this moment, Kai and Jizzy smiled and said, "What are you all waiting for? These treasures were all chosen for you from the secret vault of our city to help ensure a smooth trip. All of them can be used without being refined, but each of you can only choose one." Everyone faltered slightly upon hearing this, before expressions of elation appeared on their faces. Many of them immediately made hand seals, or simply made grabbing motions to draw their desired treasure toward them. The few treasures with the most powerful auras were taken almost right away. Thus, spiritual lights of different colors flashed as treasures flew left and right through the air. It was a free-for-all contest to see who could secure the best treasure. In the blink of an eye, close to half of the treasures had been taken, but there were still a few people who were yet to make their choices, and were still considering their options. Treasures with prominent auras were most definitely quite powerful, but that didn't mean that the treasures with weaker auras were necessarily inferior. At times, picking a treasure that had great synergy with one's cultivation arts was a far superior option to simply trying to choose the most powerful treasure. Han Li was also one of the beings who hadn't chosen a treasure yet. However, he didn't wait for too long either. Blue light quickly flashed through his eyes, and he abruptly made a grabbing motion. Azure light flashed from one of the treasures hovering in midair, following which a large azure hand appeared, grabbing onto the treasure before drawing it back toward Han Li. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D428, letter 1D46. Spiritual light then flashed from his hand as a jade fan that was shimmering with blue light appeared in his grasp. The image of a scenic mountain peak had been inscribed on the surface of the fan, and a burst of glacial power was emanating from it. This was an ice attribute treasure. Han Li nodded with a pleased smile, but he then suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and he raised his head in a calm manner, just in time to see the woman in the blue palatial dress also casting her gaze toward him, focusing her attention on the blue jade fan in his hand. However, after noticing that Han Li was also appraising her from afar, she withdrew her gaze again. She was also one of the people who hadn't chosen a treasure yet, and a contemplative look appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. In the end, the woman chose a white ruler treasure that also seemed to be imbued with glacial power. After the final person had chosen their desired treasure, Xianxia swept a sleeve through the air, and white light flashed as all of the remaining treasures disappeared into his sleeve as streaks of spiritual light. After consulting with the white-robed man, Xianxia announced, "There's not much time left, so go and prepare yourselves for the upcoming journey." Thus, everyone began to depart from the hall. After arriving on the plaza outside the hall, Han Li took a casual glance up into the sky to find that it seemed to be around noon, given how dazzling the sun was. He then cast his gaze toward the two massive formations nearby, to find that there were already over 100 armored warriors standing around them, each of which were holding formation plates and formation flags. The spirit stones that were embedded into the formations were also shimmering with faint spiritual light, and it seemed that everything had been prepared. However, Han Li's eyes suddenly narrowed as he turned his attention to the air above the formations. There was a head-sized ball of light hovering in midair there, and its surface was flashing incessantly with five-colored light. There seemed to be something inside that ball of light as well, and it didn't take Han Li long to sense that it was none other than the vast glacial badge that he'd unintentionally activated. However, the badge seemed to have been temporarily restricted by the five-colored ball of light, thereby completely immobilizing it. At this moment, Xianxia and the others also emerged from the hall, and they all stopped outside before also looking up at the bright sun in the sky. "We can't afford any errors in timing. Bring out the vast glacial apparatus," Xianxia ordered. "Yes." Several armored warriors immediately flew into the hall as streaks of silver light. Moments later, they re-emerged from the hall, carrying a gargantuan object in an extremely strenuous manner. The object was over 100 feet tall and appeared to be a massive azure bell. However, there were a dozen so dragon head statues on its surface, all of which had their eyes closed, thereby giving the bell quite a mystical appearance. Following a resounding thud, the vast glacial apparatus was set down heavily at the center of the plaza, causing the entire ground to tremor slightly in the process. Xianxia immediately made a hand seal before raising his hand, and a white incantation seal flew forth before vanishing into the vast glacial apparatus in a flash. Scintillating light immediately began to radiate from the surface of the massive azure bell, and at the same time, countless azure runes appeared out of thin air. The dozen or so extremely lifelike dragon statues then began to move as if they'd sprung to life, but then quickly fell still again. Only the mysterious runes on the surface of the giant bell continued to flash incessantly. Everyone, including Han Li, had turned their attention to this object, but they were naturally unable to identify what it was being used for. At this moment, Xianxia and the other holy-grade beings suddenly began to converse with one another, and they paid no further heed to the vast glacial apparatus. Not long after that, the white-robed man emerged from within the hall. All of the other cultivators who were going to enter the vast glacial realm were either inspecting the giant formations or praising the vast glacial apparatus with solemn expressions on their faces. The vast glacial realm was a land of opportunities, especially to those who were at cultivation bottlenecks, but it was also fraught with peril, and many beings had perished in there. Those people all possessed similar levels of aptitude and power to themselves, so everyone was naturally rather uneasy and apprehensive. Han Li stood silently in a corner, and he wasn't looking at the formations, nor at the vast glacial apparatus. Instead, he continued to look up at the bright sun in the sky through narrowed eyes in a completely motionless manner. Time slowly passed by, and after a long while, a dragon roar suddenly erupted into the heavens from the plaza. Han Li's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly cast his gaze toward the plaza. There he discovered that the dozen or so dragon head statues had all opened their eyes, which were shimmering with golden light, and they were roaring up into the sky with their heads raised high. Everyone below the five-colored light barrier instantly fell silent upon seeing this. All of a sudden, a cold voice rang out from within the hall. "The vast glacial realm has opened. Activate the formation and open the passageway." The voice belonged to none other than the white-robed man with the Wing surname, and everyone on the plaza stirred upon hearing these instructions. All of the beings who were standing in the formations already immediately activated their formation flags and formation plates in unison. Countless incantation seals of different colors flew forth from their formation treasures, all of which disappeared into the formations. The two massive formations began to emit a loud buzzing sound as a result, and the spirit stones embedded into their surfaces began to flash erratically with spiritual lights of different colors. At the same time, an extremely astonishing aura began to proliferate in all directions, and a vast expanse of dark clouds abruptly gathered in the air beneath the five-colored light barrier, as if they'd been drawn to this place by the power of the formations. The dark clouds completely obscured the entire sky, following which fierce winds were swept up in the area. Arcs of silver lightning began to appear within the clouds, flashing like bright silver snakes amid rumbling thunderclaps. Black vortexes of different sizes then also began to take shape before devouring and tearing at one another. A series of astonishing phenomena were conjured up, and the five-colored balls of light were quickly shattered to reveal the shimmering golden and silver badges within. Fellow Taoist Han, Fairy Yue, you too may enter the formations with your respective teams and activate the vast glacial badges, Kai and Jizzy yelled without any hesitation upon seeing this. Han Li and the woman in the blue dress naturally immediately did as they were told, striding toward the formation that their respective vast glacial badges were situated in. All of their team members also followed suit, while the beings inside the formations who were holding various types of formation treasures backed out of the formations instead. Even so, the formation treasures in their hands were still blasting incantation seals into the formations in a frenzy, without displaying any signs of stopping. As soon as Han Li made his way into the formation, his heart jolted, and he could sense that his connection with the vast glacial badge had been strengthened by severalfold. The shimmering vast glacial badge also began to emit a low buzzing sound, as if it were expressing its elation toward Han Li's arrival. Kai and Jizzy had naturally already told him how to activate the badge in advance. As such, Han Li strode toward the center of the formation, then flicked his 10 fingers through the air in rapid succession, sending one incantation seal after another disappearing into the vast glacial badge that was hovering in midair. Immediately thereafter, countless golden and silver runes emerged from the vast glacial badge, and these runes revolved around the badge before forming a light formation that had a diameter of around 10 feet. The vast glacial badge was situated at the very center of the formation, and Han Li took a deep breath before pointing a finger up at the badge in a solemn manner. An azure pillar of light immediately shot forth from his fingertip to strike the badge, causing it to emit a loud cry while the entire light formation began to tremor. Brilliant golden and silver light radiated in all directions, and the light formation slowly revolved before also blasting forth a pillar of golden and silver light that was around as thick as a water tank. The pillar of light rose up into the sky, disappearing into a certain black vortex up above in a flash, but it showed no signs of stopping there. A loud rumbling noise rang out in the air above, and the vortex that the pillar of light had vanished into suddenly began to tumble and churn violently, as if it were being stirred up by some kind of immense force. All of the other vortexes around it were instantly swept up and torn apart while the main vortex swelled drastically in size. After just the span of a few breaths, all of the vortexes in the sky had disappeared aside from two massive ones that were around 500 meters in diameter each, both of which were emanating dense black chi. At this moment, the badges at the centers of the light formation suddenly vanished amid a flash of golden and silver lightning, then abruptly reappeared at the centers of the vortexes directly above them. Letter 1D453, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D638, letter 1D626, letter 1D450, letter 1D45C, letter 1D4C2. An earth-shattering boom rang out as golden and silver lightning exploded violently, and it was as if two golden and silver suns had emerged. The two scintillating suns then traveled deep into the vortexes, and in the next instant, devastating bursts of spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted from within the vortexes. Both of the vortexes then abruptly disappeared along with the black chi around them, and a pair of golden and silver spatial rifts appeared in their wake. The rifts were only around 70 to 80 feet each, and they hung in midair in a completely stationary manner, as if they were motionless snapshots in time. At this moment, Han Li suddenly sensed that the spiritual sense within his body was flowing into the rift above him at a rapid rate, and expression changed drastically as he yelled, "What are you all waiting for? I won't be able to keep this up for very long." The beings who were standing around the formation immediately tossed their formation treasures into the air upon hearing this. Immediately thereafter, they began to make hand seals and chanted in unison. The formation treasures hovering before them all transformed into balls of light at their behest, all of which disappeared into the formations. An extremely exuberant display of lights appeared within the formations, following which large runes began to surface all over the place. As the chanting grew louder and louder, these giant runes began to revolve rapidly within the formations, and their rotational speed only grew faster and faster. In the end, these runes transformed into bursts of five-colored light that swept up all of the beings inside the two formations. Immediately thereafter, the bursts of five-colored light flew straight into the golden and silver rifts up above. Almost as soon as the two balls of five-colored light vanished into the spatial rifts, the latter also disappeared in a flash, and the sky slowly returned to normal as all of the dark clouds also dissipated. Xianxia and the others had witnessed this entire process, and only now did they allow themselves to heave a collective sigh of relief. Right at this moment, the white-robed man's cold voice rang out from within the hall again. The vast glacial realm will open again in a year, and activating the formations again at that time will allow everyone to return here. During this time, make sure to keep the two formations extremely well guarded, and don't let irrelevant beings approach them. Kill anyone who dares to try and approach the formations for no good reason. Yes. Everyone on the entire plaza extended respectful bows toward the hall in unison. After that, all of the beings who had activated the formation treasures earlier dispersed from around the formations, and they were replaced by teams of silver-armored warriors, as well as a dozen or so giant puppets. These guards then surrounded the formations in a virtually airtight barrier. After entering the golden and silver spatial rift, Han Li was struck by a rush of dizziness, followed by a complete sensory deprivation. However, moments later, he was afflicted by a splitting headache, and his vision returned to him as he hurriedly inspected his surroundings. Upon doing so, he discovered that he was situated high up in the air. Below him was a vast ocean that stretched as far as the eyes could see in all directions, and Shikun, Liu Shuyer, as well as everyone else on his team, were situated within a radius of several hundred feet around him. Most of them were still rather disoriented, seemingly having yet to recover from the effects of teleporting into the vast glacial realm. After inspecting his surroundings, a gray-haired elderly man immediately burst into raucous laughter. "Haha, I've finally made it to the vast glacial realm. With the vast abundance of spiritual chi here, I'll have a much greater chance of reaching the holy race. Fellow Taoists, I'm going to find a place to go into seclusion, so I'll be taking my leave now." He then swept a sleeve through the air, and spiritual light flashed from his body, following which he sped away as a streak of silver light, disappearing from view after just a few flashes. Everyone glanced at one another upon seeing this, and 3 more people also departed in different directions without uttering a single word, quickly vanishing into the distance as well. The remaining 11 people remained standing on the spot with different expressions on their faces, and they were yet to decide what they were going to do next. Fellow Taoists, the vast glacial realm presents a fantastic opportunity to break through your bottlenecks, but make sure that's not the only thing you do here. There are many treasures to be found in this place as well, and I suggest we all stick together so we can look out for one another while searching for these treasures. What do you all say? The one who had spoken was an extremely short being with a triangular head. A burly man with several thick golden rings around his arms chuckled coldly as he said, "I do indeed plan on joining forces with others, but I'm not interested in hunting for treasures with you, fellow Taoist Jin. You've forged a reputation for yourself among our heavenly cloud races for your shamelessness and deceitful nature. Even if we were to find treasures together, I'd be afraid that you stab me in the back. Brother Feng, Brother Yun, let's team up together." The twins from the Azure race seemed to have forged an agreement with the burly man already, and the 3 of them immediately sped away together. Thus, there were only 8 beings left. Han Li wasn't surprised to see this at all, and he smiled as he waved a hand toward Shikun and Liu Shuyer. "Let's go as well, fellow Taoists." "Haha, I thought you'd never ask," Shikun chuckled in response. Liu Shuyer merely nodded in a silent reply. Thus, Han Li's trio also departed toward a certain direction, as the remaining beings looked on with hints of bewilderment in their eyes. As for whether the rest of those beings teamed up or went off on their own, that was naturally none of Han Li's concern. The 3 of them all flew quite quickly, and it only took them a short while to cover several hundreds of kilometers. At this moment, Liu Shuyer suddenly said, "Fellow Taoist Han, my master suggested that we should find an obscure place to practice our divine essence-fused light combination secret technique first before we do anything else. After mastering the secret technique, we'd be much better equipped to protect ourselves in this perilous realm." Shikun was a menacing-looking man who appeared as if his entire body had been constructed from gray rocks, and he shook his head as he said, "Why do we need to go through the hassle of doing that? With our combined powers, as long as we don't encounter some of the most powerful beings in this realm, we'll be more than able to look after ourselves. Even though we have an entire year before we get teleported back to Cloud City, we still don't know where we are at the moment, and there may not be enough time for us to make breakthroughs and also track down those restricted ruins. As such, I think we should make haste and skip any trivial activities that aren't necessary." Fellow Taoist Shi, the divine essence effused light combination secret technique is something that my master invented specifically for this trip after expending an extensive amount of painstaking effort, and it's far more powerful than you can imagine. I insist that we should rehearse the technique first. Otherwise, it'll be too late for regrets once we encounter a powerful enemy, Liu Shuyer countered in a slightly cold voice, clearly rather displeased by Shi Kun's words. "Is that so? I still think that compared to this, it's much more important for us to get to the restricted ruins as quickly as possible, then use the remaining time to break through our bottlenecks. I haven't cultivated any combination techniques in the past, but I've still reached the current level of power, have I not?" Shi Kun chuckled coldly, clearly unwilling to back down either. Liu Shuyer's expression cooled even further upon hearing this, and she turned to Han Li as she asked, "What do you think, fellow Taoist Han?" And Li thought about this for a moment before suggesting, "I think that seeing as neither of you is willing to back down, we should find a middle ground that both of you can agree on. I suggest that we do practice this combination secret technique, but we only spend half a month doing so. At the conclusion of that period of time, we set off in search of the restricted ruins regardless of whether we've mastered the technique or not. In that case, we'll be able to familiarize ourselves slightly with the secret technique, and I'm sure half a month isn't too long to wait for Brother Shi." "Well, all right, we'll do as you say, fellow Taoist Han." Liu Shire was rather hesitant upon hearing this proposal, but Shi Kun quickly agreed to it after a brief moment of contemplation. "Seeing as both of you support this course of action, I have no choice but to agree as well," Liu Shuyer replied with a reluctant nod. "In that case, let's find somewhere suitable for us to practice the secret technique first," Han Li said with a smile. Neither Shi Kun nor Liu Shuyer had any objections to this, so the three of them immediately sped up by about twofold, hurtling through the air like a trio of shooting stars while releasing their spiritual sense into the area around them. They had thought that they'd be able to find a small island quite quickly, but much to their surprise, they only caught sight of a small island in the distance that was less than 10 kilometers in size after flying for an entire day and an entire night. At this point, the sun was just beginning to set, and the entire sky above the island was filled with a warm red light. However, the surface of the nearby ocean was completely black, as if it had been stained by a vast spillage of black paint. Upon seeing this island, Han Li's trio immediately slowed down, then reappeared several kilometers away as they appraised the area with wary expressions on their faces. "My spiritual sense can't detect what lies below the island, and the sea around it is also teeming with demonic chi. It appears that a certain demon beast has taken over this island," Shi Kun speculated with a grim expression. "Indeed, there's only one sea beast under the island, but it's not a very powerful one. Its cultivation base seems to be comparable to my own," Han Li said in a slow voice as blue light flashed through his eyes. "You can sense what lies beneath this island." Liu Shuyer was rather surprised to hear this. She was in a similar situation to Shi Kun in that as soon as her spiritual sense approached the island, it would become quite blurry and indistinct. It appeared that the sea in the nearby area possessed certain properties that hampered one's spiritual sense. "I was lucky to have mastered some special secret techniques in the past, and possess an alternative sensory ability aside from my spiritual sense," Han Li replied in a calm manner. "That's fantastic. With that ability of yours, we'll be able to avoid a lot of danger, Brother Han." Shi Kun was quite elated to hear this. Han Li merely offered a smile in response. Liu Shuyer's eyes also lit up and she said, "Indeed, our trip will be made a lot safer by this ability of yours, fellow Taoist Han. Seeing as this island has been taken over by a sea beast, let's go and find another place to settle. It's not worth wasting magic power fight for an island like this." On this occasion, Shi Kun agreed with Liu Shuyer's suggestion, and he immediately nodded to express his approval. However, Han Li shook his head after a brief moment of contemplation. "Even if we find some other place, the situation won't be any better." "Oh, what do you mean by that, Brother Han?" Shi Kun was rather taken aback to hear this. Liu Shuyer also turned to him with a hint, if befuddlement in her eyes. As opposed to answering the question, Han Li replied with a question of his own. What did you two think about the speed that we traveled at to get here? It was all right. We didn't travel at full speed, but for me, that was around 60% to 70% of my full speed, Shikun replied. That's exactly the point. We've traveled for an entire day and an entire night at this speed, so we must have covered millions of kilometers already. On top of that, we've been using our spiritual sense to scour through the surrounding area this entire time. So don't you find it strange that we've only come across this one island after all this time? Han Li sighed. What are you trying to say, fellow Taoist Han? I'm not the sharpest when it comes to things like this, and I hate it when people speaking a roundabout manner, Shikun harumphed in an impatient manner. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. He certainly wasn't going to believe that Shikun was as ignorant as he was making himself seem. Are you trying to say that something's a little off about the sea here, and that even if we were to find other islands, they would have most likely been taken over by other sea beasts already? Liu Shuyer asked. That's exactly what I mean. This island has already been taken over by a sea beast, but it's not very powerful at all, and will be able to take care of it easily. I think that's a much better course of action than wasting time searching for other islands, Han Li explained in a slow voice. That makes sense. All right, we'll do as you say, Brother Han. In any case, the three of us will definitely be able to take care of this sea beast without any problems, Shikun said, as a ferocious look flashed through his eyes. I also think this is a good idea. Liu Shuyer nodded in agreement after a brief pause. All right, in that case, let's make some preparations. As a safety precaution, I'm going to set up a temporary formation so we can kill this sea beast without any being noticed by any other beasts in the area, Han Li said in a calm manner. Shikun and Liu Shuyer naturally posed no objections to this. Thus, Han Li flipped a hand over, and a stack of formation flags appeared over his palm. He tossed the formation flags into the air, then made a hand seal as he began to chant something. A dozen or so streaks of light of different colors immediately surged toward the ocean before vanishing in a flash. In the next instant, a dozen or so thick pillars of light suddenly erupted from the sea down below. These pillars of light then dispersed to form a barely visible white light barrier that encompassed the entire island. I'll also lend you my assistance, Liu Shuyer suddenly said as she raised a hand into the air, sending a yellow disc hurtling forth before instantly flying into the air over 1,000 feet above the white light barrier. She then pointed a finger up above, and the yellow disc rotated on the spot before also emitting a yellow light barrier that encompassed Han Li's white light barrier within it. With these restrictions set up, I'm sure we won't attract any attention even if we battle all out in there, Liu Shuyer said in a calm voice. Haha, in that case, I'll be able to fight to my heart's content. Shikun chortled with glee as yellow light flashed from his body, and he immediately donned a suit of yellow armor. Immediately thereafter, Shikun flew through the two restriction barriers, hurtling directly toward the island. From afar, he looked like a yellow shooting star plummeting from the sky. The streak of yellow light crashed down into a forest at the very center of the island with a resounding boom, and yellow shockwaves that were visible to the naked eye proliferated in all directions. All of the trees, rocks, and mountains that stood in the path of these yellow shockwaves were all instantly pulverized into powder. In the blink of an eye, the entire island had been razed to the ground. At the center of the island, Shikun stood proudly in a massive crater that was several feet deep, and he was in the process of slowly withdrawing his fist from the ground. He had essentially destroyed everything on the island with just a single punch. Liu Shuyer shuddered slightly at the sight of Shikun's terrifying destructive power, and Han Li's eyes also narrowed slightly. It appeared that Shikun's confidence and his unwillingness to cultivate the combination secret technique certainly wasn't unwarranted. I'd always known that stone cocoon beings were renowned for possessing powerful bodies, but it appears that fellow Taoist she must have also used quite a powerful cultivation art. Otherwise, there's no way that an upper race being could be capable of unleashing such devastating might, Liu Shuyer murmured to herself, but also seemingly to Han Li as well. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, as if he hadn't even heard what had just been said. Shikun seemed to be quite pleased with his own handiwork, and he raised his head as if he were about to say something to Han Li and Liu Shuyer. However, right at this moment, the entire island tremored violently, and the black seawater around it also began to churn as if it were being boiled. 7 or 8 thick black objects then erupted from the seawater around the small island, and each of these objects was 2,000 to 3,000 feet tall, extending into the clouds like giant black pillars. However, these pillars had fleshy bumps all over them and were squirming incessantly, creating quite a harrowing sight to behold. And Li immediately focused his gaze to discover that these were all gargantuan tentacles. Not only were these tentacles covered in dark green patterns, they were also riddled with massive suction cups the size of wagon wheels, creating a truly disturbing sight. As soon as these tentacles emerged, Shikun stomped a foot into the ground, and his body shot forth like an arrow, taking him to the nearest tentacle in a flash before he swiped an arm through the air. A streak of yellow light hurtled forth like a giant blade that was over 100 feet long, slicing through one of the massive tentacles with ease. A massive fountain of green blood immediately spurted into the air, and rank green blood began to rain down from the sky. Shikun let loose a burst of raucous laughter upon seeing this, and his body swayed as he prepared to fly toward another tentacle. However, a thunderous roar suddenly erupted from below the island, causing the entire sky in the nearby area to tremor audibly. Shikun faltered in midair as his expression changed slightly, and right at this moment, the sea beast's severed tentacle suddenly whipped violently through the air. The bleeding from the wound immediately ceased, and bursts of putrid green mist were blasted forth from within. Shikun was clearly an extremely experienced warrior, and he immediately retreated upon seeing this, flying back to over 300 feet away to distance himself from this green mist. However, as opposed to attacking Shikun, the green mist in the air suddenly manifested into a complete tentacle that was identical to one he had just severed. Shikun's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he immediately swiped his arm through the air again to unleash another devastating streak of yellow light. However, on this occasion, all of the suction cups on the newly formed tentacle immediately compressed before expanding to expel bursts of black light. The yellow streak of light struck the black light with a loud clang, followed by the sharp screeching sound of metal grating on metal. The yellow streak of light was able to slice through part of the black light, but it finally fizzled out into nothingness just before it could reach the sea beast's tentacle. At this moment, the roar erupting from below the island became even louder, and the tentacle came crashing down toward Shikun with mountainous force. Before it had even struck him, fierce gusts of wind were swept up, making it quite difficult for Shikun to stand still on the spot. A ferocious look appeared on his face, and he let loose a loud roar as he launched a fist into the air. Han Li and Liu Shuye were both spectating the battle intently from above, and they noticed that in the instant Shikun unleashed that punch, his fist swelled up like a balloon to 5 to 6 times its original size. Furthermore, several yellow runes emerged from the giant fist before exploding in unison, and a yellow halo swept forth, forming shockwave-like ripples of light. As soon as the giant tentacle came into contact with the yellow light, its skin was twisted and warped as if it had been stirred up by some kind of immense force. Immediately thereafter, the tentacle began to essentially disintegrate as it fell from above as chunks of skin and flesh, along with gushing green blood. This punch seemed to be even more powerful than the one Shikun had unleashed to flatten the entire small island. Even Han Li's eyelids twitched involuntarily upon seeing this. However, the sea beast below the island had clearly been completely enraged by this attack, and it let loose a violent roar as its remaining few tentacles whipped through the air in unison, forming countless black shadows that crashed directly toward Shikun. These tentacles were so massive that they were sweeping up a hurricane that encompassed the entire island. Black shadows and gale force winds intertwined, completely inundating Shikun in the process. Looks like we won't need to do anything. Fellow Taoist, she should be enough to take care of this sea beast on his own, Liu Shuye sighed as she looked on from above. Indeed, brother, she possesses an extremely powerful body, so this sea beast will inevitably be killed eventually. However, this thing seems to possess an immortal body ability, so it's best that we enter the ocean and kill its main body first. After all, it won't be a good thing to have this battle drag on for too long, Han Li replied after a brief pause. That's true. I just so happen to be using a water attribute cultivation art, so I'll take care of this, Liu Shuye replied with a nod. Han Li was rather surprised to hear this, but he merely smiled and agreed. In that case, I'll leave everything to you, Fairy Liu. Thus, Liu Shuye made a hand seal, and blue light flashed from her body as she sped directly downward as a streak of blue light, vanishing into the ocean after just a few flashes. Almost at the exact same moment, a string of resounding booms rang out from the small island, which had been entirely enshrouded under fierce winds and black shadows. Han Li cast his gaze toward the island to discover balls of piercing yellow light forcibly tearing their way through the powerful winds. At the same time, an astonishingly scorching aura erupted into the heavens, causing even the two restriction barriers up above to tremor slightly. Mid these resounding booms, Shikun's raucous laughter was still clearly audible, and he seemed to have only just gotten warmed up. Is he a berserker? I'd only ever heard of such beings in the past, but I appear to be witnessing one in action right now, Han Li murmured to himself with a wry smile on his face while sweeping a sleeve through the air. A burst of azure light swept forth, disappearing into the white light barrier in a flash, and the restriction barrier fell completely still again. Thus, Shikun continued in his rampage on the small island, constantly pulverizing the tentacles around him, while the tentacles of the sea beast quickly regenerated amid a burst of green mist. Thus, the two of them came to an impasse of sorts. However, moments later, the beastly roars erupting from below the island suddenly took an anguished turn, and the seawater down below began to churn violently. A massive wave that was over 1,000 feet tall was swept up without any premonition, before hurtling toward the small island with devastating might. If such an astonishingly powerful wave really were to strike the island, there was a good chance that it would sink. Han Li's expression darkened slightly as he looked on from above, and he immediately extended a pristine white palm of his sleeve, then spread his fingers open before making a grabbing motion. 5 bursts of 5-colored glacial flames immediately erupted from his fingertips, injecting themselves into the white light barrier, encompassing the island in a flash. The light barrier immediately took on the 5 colors of the glacial flames, and at this moment, the giant wave crashed down upon it. The 5-colored light barrier appeared to be extremely thin and fragile, but as 5-colored light swept over its surface, all of the seawater was instantly frozen into glacial ice. Thus, a peculiar scene ensued. A massive dome of blue ice appeared over the island, keeping all of the oncoming waves of seawater at bay, while the small island itself remained completely unscathed. Han Li nodded with a pleased expression upon seeing this before withdrawing his hand. The giant waves only crashed into the wall of ice a few times before they subsided, and the entire surface of the ocean suddenly became remarkably calm. Just as a contemplative expression had appeared on Han Li's face, a resounding boom rang out as a humanoid figure flew up from the island, then appeared in midair. What happened? Why isn't that sea beast attacking anymore? Could it be that fellow Taoist Liu decided to lend me a hand? The humanoid figure was naturally none other than Shikun, and he was looking at Han Li with a hint of confusion in his eyes. Han Li smiled upon hearing this, yet just as he was about to say something, a massive black vortex suddenly appeared on the surface of the ocean beside the island. The seawater nearby revolved around the vortex as the mountainous body of a black beast rose to the surface, revealing itself to be a gargantuan black octopus. However, not only was this octopus extraordinarily huge, it also possessed the face of a ferocious-looking human male. There were even 2 thick arms attached to its body alongside the giant tentacles, and attached to each of those arms was a hand that was wielding a crimson spear-like weapon. A burst of blue light shot forth out of the water from beside the giant sea beast's carcass, then abruptly appeared in the air beside Han Li. The blue light faded, and Liu Shuya's gorgeous figure was revealed. So it really was you, Fairy Liu. Tusk, you must have some tricks up your sleeve to be able to take care of this giant beast so quickly, Shikun said with a hint of surprise in his eyes. It wasn't much. If it weren't for the fact that you attracted most of the beast's attention, I wouldn't have been able to kill it anywhere near as easily. I must say, your abilities are quite impressive, fellow Taoist Han. You've even managed to freeze such a vast quantity of seawater, Liu Shuya remarked as she took a glance at the massive dome of ice down below. There's no need for you two to be so modest. Seeing as the beast has been slain, let's withdraw these restrictions and settle on the island, Han Li chuckled. Shikun and Liu Shuya naturally had no objections to this, and the former immediately began to descend toward the island. Meanwhile, Han Li and Liu Shuya both made hand seals to withdraw their restrictions. Brother Han, we can't just leave this dome of ice here. It's far too eye-catching, Liu Shuya said as she pointed downward. Han Li seemed to have considered this issue already, and he quickly replied, "Of course, I'll melt it right away." After that, he opened his mouth to expel a silver fireball, which immediately transformed into a silver fire raven that was around a foot in size. Go, Han Li instructed as he swept a sleeve toward the fire raven. The fire raven spread its wings before diving headfirst into the dome of ice amid a clear cry. A peculiar scene then ensued. The dome of glacial ice that was as hard as rock began to melt away in large sections from the spot that the fire raven had disappeared into it, reverting back to churning seawater before raining down from above. Within just a few minutes, the entire dome of ice had vanished. Only then did Han Li raise a hand, and the silver fire raven immediately re-emerged before disappearing up his sleeve after just a few flashes. You possess both fire and ice attribute abilities. That's very rare, fellow Taoist Han, Liu Shuyer said with a hint of surprise in her eyes. These are just a few little tricks that aren't all that noteworthy, Han Li replied with a modest smile before also slowly descending toward the island. Liu Shuyer's brows furrowed slightly, and she was forced to swallow the questions that she was about to ask as she also descended as a streak of blue light. At this moment, Shikun had already been waiting for a short at the center of the island. He'd also witnessed Han Li unleashing his fire raven to melt that dome of ice, but his expression remained quite calm, in stark contrast with the insanity he just displayed in battle. Han Li's heart stirred slightly upon seeing this. We don't have much time, so let's start practicing the combination secret technique right away, Shikun suggested as soon as Han Li and Liu Shuyer descended nearby. Of course. However, this secret technique has to have a main instigator while the other two play supportive roles, and it's best for the leader to be the one with the most powerful divine essence-effused light. The three of us should unleash our respective divine essence-effused light to decide on who the leader should be, Liu Shuyer replied with a nod. I have no issue with that. I've heard that Fairy Liu possesses a natural essence-effused body, while I possess an acquired essence-effused body. I wonder which one is more powerful. Shikun's eyes lit up with a hint of excitement as he spoke. I think we'll both have our strengths and weaknesses. Due to the fact that I possess a natural essence-effused body, I have great control over my divine essence-effused light, as if it's an extension of my body, but cultivating it is very difficult for me. In contrast, with an acquired essence-effused body, you're able to enhance your powers easily using external help, Liu Shuyer analyzed in a calm manner. But those with natural essence-effused bodies have a chance to evolve their divine essence-effused light. That's something the likes of myself can't compare with. On top of that, I had to endure a lot of suffering to acquire this body. Fellow Taoist Han, I've heard that you're different from both of us in that you're only able to unleash the divine essence-effused light through the use of an essence-effused treasure. Is that true? Shikun chuckled as he turned toward Han Li. That is indeed true. My divine essence-effused light definitely can't compete with you two, so I won't participate in this contest, Han Li replied with a nonchalant smile. Shikun stared at Han Li for a moment upon hearing this, but didn't press him any further as he said, In that case, we won't force the issue, brother Han. Why don't you have a sparring match with me, Fairy Liu? Liu Shuyer nodded before slowly rising up into the air, until she was hovering over 200 feet above the ground. For some reason, she also seemed to be very interested in Shikun's acquired essence-effused body. Shikun let loose a low cry, and yellow light flashed all over his body as he rose up to the same altitude as Liu Shuyer before facing her in midair. Meanwhile, Han Li flew back to over 1,000 feet away, leaving a trail of afterimages in his wake before looking up in an expressionless manner. He didn't have any interest in leading the combination secret technique, but he was rather interested to see how powerful the divine essence-effused light of these two beings were. At this moment, Shikun let loose a loud cry as his skin gradually turned black, transforming him into what appeared to be a black rock golem. Immediately thereafter, he made a hand seal, and gray light instantly took the place of the yellow light around his body. This was none other than the divine essence-effused light. Look out now, Fairy Liu, Shikun warned before raising an arm and spreading his fingers apart before making a grabbing motion. A pillar of gray light immediately shot forth from his palm, but as soon as it left his body, it transformed into thousands of gray threads of light that filled the entire sky. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked on from down below. Liu Shuyer made a hand seal in an unhurried manner upon seeing this, and gray light also erupted from her graceful body, forming a massive wheel of light with a radius of 30 to 40 feet behind her, and the wheel was slowly rotating behind her. The center of the wheel flashed, and a burst of gray light swept forth, hurtling directly toward the oncoming threads of light. The two clashed in an instant, resulting in a loud explosion. Both of them were using the same type of power, so none of the divine essence-effused light's advantages over other types of powers could play a role here. As such, this battle could only be decided purely by the powers of their respective divine essence-effused light. Following the conclusion of the explosion, all of the gray light had vanished into nothingness, and it appeared that their first clash had concluded in a tie. "Splendid, now see if you can handle this," Shikun chortled as he suddenly slammed his hands together in front of his chest. His black rocky body shuddered as a burst of piercing gray light emerged, and it was as if he'd transformed into a scintillating gray sun that was too bright to be directly appraised. A serious expression appeared on Liu Shuyer's face for the first time, and she immediately made a series of quick hand seals while chanting something at the same time. The gray wheel of light behind her blurred before rotating at a rapid rate, and countless runes surged forth from it in a frenzy, shattering before converging again. In the blink of an eye, a massive rune had taken shape at the center of the wheel of light. "Go!" Shikun let loose a low cry as he swept both arms through the air, and they transformed into countless projections that hurtled through the air, as if he'd unleashed hundreds of punches in a split second. Each and every fist projection then transformed into a head-sized ball of gray light, and hundreds of them rushed toward Liu Shuyer in a frenzy, creating quite an intimidating sight to behold. In the face of such an astonishing assault, Liu Shuyer merely harumphed coldly before pointing a finger up ahead. A burst of buzzing immediately rang out from the gray wheel of light behind her, and its rotation came to an abrupt halt as the massive rune shot forth from its center. A peculiar scene then unfolded. As soon as the rune sped into the air, it swelled drastically in size, reaching several hundred feet in just a few flashes. It continued on toward the balls of gray light in a soundless manner, obscuring virtually the entire sky. After striking the massive rune, all of the balls of light vanished in a flash like sandcastles being swept away by the rising tide. Shikun had gray light flashing from his hands, and he was about to unleash a second wave of attacks, but his expression immediately faltered upon seeing this. After a short while, he lowered his hands as a wry smile appeared on his face. "That's enough for me. As expected of a natural essence-effused body, my acquired body simply can't compare. There's no way that I'll be able to beat that attack." Shikun made no effort to prolong this sparring match, immediately conceding after deciding that there was no chance for victory, then descended back onto the ground. "There's no need to be so depressed, fellow Taoist Shi. I only recently grasped that ability, and I wouldn't have unleashed it had it not been for the fact that you dethroned such a devastating attack at me. In reality, the power of your divine essence-effused light is quite comparable to mine." Liu Shuyer chuckled in consolation before pointing a finger at the giant rune. The rune immediately shattered amid a flash of gray light, then disintegrated into specks of gray light that surged back into the gray wheel. Following a gentle wave of her arm, the gray wheel of light disappeared in a flash, and she also slowly descended from up above. There's no need to try and flatter me, fellow Taoist Liu. I'm well aware of the extent of my abilities. I gave everything I could just then, but you probably only used 60% to 70% of the power of your divine essence-effused light at most. I don't know about fellow Taoist Han, but there's no way that I can match you in this aspect," Shikun replied in a nonchalant manner. "Even brother, she is no match for Fairy Liu, so there's no way that I can compare when my divine essence-effused light is merely stemming from a treasure," Han Li said with a hint of a smile on his face. Liu Shuyer and Shikun naturally did completely believe what Han Li was saying, but seeing as his divine essence-effused light really did stem from a treasure, it was most likely the case that it would indeed be inferior in power compared to theirs. As such, the two of the three of them exchanged some further pleasantries, and they didn't force Han Li to display his power. Unbeknownst to them, the treasure that Han Li was referring to was an entire divine essence-effused mountain. If they'd known that, there was no way that they'd be thinking this way. Thus, following that sparring match, Liu Shuyer was assigned the leader of the combination secret technique, while Han Li and Shikun were to play secondary support roles. The three of them immediately set up a giant illusionary formation in the nearby area to disguise the fact that the entire island had been razed to the ground, then began to practice the secret technique. A dozen or so days passed in a flash. During this time, no other beings or sea beasts passed by the island, so no mishaps occurred. After 3 or 4 more days, the illusionary formation on the island suddenly vanished, and 3 humanoid figures rose up into the air. This was naturally none other than Han Li's trio. Liu Shuyer wore an elated expression, while Han Li remained quite calm, and Shi Kun looked like he simply didn't care. It appeared that their cultivation on the island had gone very smoothly. I didn't think that our cultivation of the combination secret technique would go so smoothly. We've managed to master it in just half a month. That's mainly because your mastery of the divine essence-fused light far outstrips ours. Fellow Taoist Han and I both benefited greatly from cultivating with you, Shi Kun chuckled in reply. Indeed, I didn't think that there were so many forms that the divine essence-fused light could adopt. I really must thank you for your instruction, Han Li chimed in with a smile. Letter 1D487, letter 1D493, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D66C, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. You're far too kind, fellow Taoist. I was only able to master these things as I possess a natural essence-fused body. If you too were in my shoes, I'm sure your mastery of the divine essence-fused light would only be superior to mine, Liu Shuyer chuckled in a modest manner. That's enough exchanges of pleasantries. Let's go and find those restricted ruins as soon as we can. There's no way to ascertain where we are now in the middle of the ocean, so we have to find land first before deciding where to go next, Shi Kun suggested. Han Li and Liu Shuyer, naturally, had no objections to this. Thus, the three of them picked a certain direction before flying toward it. The three of them flew for 4 days and 4 nights, encountering only a few islands along the way. All of these islands had been taken over by other sea beasts, all of whom possessed extremely powerful auras. Sea beasts of this caliber weren't powerful enough to scare the three of them away, but they were clearly far more powerful than the octopus beast, so even the three of them would have had some difficulty facing them. As such, both Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun were quite relieved that they'd listened to Han Li's advice. Otherwise, they would have had to delay the cultivation of that secret technique after they'd found land. However, land was clearly not that easy to find. On the 5th morning, a faint black line finally appeared on the surface of the ocean in the distance, and all three of them were quite elated to see this. We've finally flown out of this accursed ocean, Shi Kun laughed heartily. Liu Shuyer was also quite elated, but she cautioned, you should still be on your guard, fellow Taoist Shi. According to the experience of those who have come before us, land is far more dangerous here than the ocean. We may have found land, but it's best to withdraw our auras so we don't end up alerting any powerful ancient beasts to our presence. Don't worry, Fairy Liu. I do enjoy a good battle, but I'm well aware of my limitations, Shi Kun replied in a nonchalant manner. Liu Shuyer was feeling slightly more reassured upon hearing this. With Shi Kun's cultivation base and experience, she naturally shouldn't have to issue such a reminder, but Shi Kun seemed to enjoy battling a little too much, which was why she had been slightly concerned. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he was just about to say something as well when violent winds were suddenly swept up in the distance over the surface of the ocean. A cloud of murky white mist began to appear, and it was spreading at a rapid rate. What's that? Han Li was rather taken aback by this sudden development. Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun had naturally also witnessed the strange scenes unfolding up ahead, and they exchanged a slightly bewildered glance with one another. Without the need for any further communication, all three of them stopped cold in their tracks before casting their eyes toward the distant shore. Almost at the exact same moment, a loud cry rang out from the shore, and the sea of mist that was a few acres in size churned violently along with the ocean around it. At the same time, an astonishing primordial aura erupted into the heavens from below the mist. Immediately thereafter, a giant beast that was several times larger than even the giant octopus they'd slain surfaced from the ocean. This was a furry giant ape-like beast with a single horn on its head. As soon as the beast flew out of the sea, it threw its head back and let loose an unbearably sharp cry. As soon as Han Li's trio heard this loud cry, their expressions changed drastically, and spiritual light flashed from their bodies as they hurriedly conjured up thick light barriers to shield themselves within, then exchanged fearful glances with one another. As soon as the sharp screech had reached their eardrums had been struck by a sharp pain. At the same time, the blood within their bodies began to churn violently, causing their limbs to experience an uncomfortable pins and needles sensation. The three of them were naturally quite startled by this. However, unbeknownst to them, this was only just the beginning. In the next instant, the sharp screech emanating from the giant beast's mouth suddenly turned into a thunderous roar that caused the nearby air to tremor audibly. Not only did the surrounding sea mist quickly disperse, as a result of this almighty roar, countless vortexes of different sizes had been formed in the nearby seawater as well. Countless fish of all types floated to the surface with their bellies facing the heavens, having been killed by the sound waves from the sea beast's devastating roar. All of a sudden, the surface of the ocean in a radius of around 50 kilometers was riddled with fish carcasses. At this moment, the light barriers around the bodies of Han Li and the others began to tremor violently, as if they were being dealt heavy blows, and their expressions darkened significantly. Liu Shuyer had turned completely pale, and her body was trembling involuntarily, looking as if she were going to plummet downward at any moment. Shi Kun's body was as still as a mountain, but there were thick veins pulsing on his forehead, and his eyes were threatening to bulge out of their sockets, clearly indicating that he was going through extreme exertion. Among the three of them, Han Li remained the least affected, and his face had only paled slightly. Strangely enough, the thunderous roar was exerting an immense amount of pressure toward all three of them, but they were completely unable to move, as if their feet had been rooted to the spot. The roar erupting from the giant beast's mouth grew louder and louder, and there were now even transparent sound waves that were visible to the naked eye surging through the air. After being swept through by these sound waves, an indentation that was over 100 feet deep was blasted into the nearby surface of the ocean, thereby forming a massive water crater. Waves that were several thousand feet tall instantly took shape before sweeping forth in all directions, as if there was an immense force propelling them from behind. Han Li and the others were situated several tens of kilometers away, but it still felt as if those waves were going to crash into them at any moment. Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun were both very alarmed by this development, yet both of them were completely rooted to the spot. The transparent sound waves were less than 500 meters away from them after just a few flashes, and Shi Kun finally managed to open his mouth slightly. In doing so, he managed to utter a faint, raspy sound, and yellow light began to flash from his body, but he was still completely unable to move. Sweat began to pour down his forehead as horror appeared in his eyes, as well as in the eyes of Liu Shuyer. Just as the transparent sound waves were about to reach them, golden light suddenly flashed past Han Li's face, and he let loose a cold harumph. The harumph wasn't very loud, but Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun both shuddered in response, following which spiritual light flashed from their bodies, and expressions of elation appeared on their faces. Immediately thereafter, Shi Kun stomped a foot into the air and shot back as a streak of yellow light. Meanwhile, Liu Shuyer made a hand seal, and her body blurred before she abruptly vanished on the spot. When she reappeared, she was already over 1,000 feet away. In just a few flashes, she had traveled close to 10 kilometers, even managing to outspeed Shi Kun in the process. As for Han Li, he'd already sped away as a streak of golden light after letting loose that cold harumph. After all three of them had fled for close to 20 kilometers, all of them finally stopped in their tracks before turning back. The transparent sound waves that were surging toward them finally ran out of power a few kilometers away from them. Unbeknownst to them, right after they'd regained their mobility, a vicious light flashed through the giant sea beast's eyes, and it cast a final glance at the direction they'd fled in before returning to the shore as if nothing had ever happened. Throughout this process, the almighty roar erupting from its mouth didn't cease for even a single moment. What kind of sea beast is this? Just its roar alone was enough to restrict our bodies and magic power. Could it be that this is a legendary true spirit giant mountain ape? Shi Kun said with a hint of lingering fear in his eyes. Liu Shuyer seemed to have recovered some of her composure, and she said, "It can't be a giant mountain ape. If it really were a true spirit being, then we would have perished to its roar already. Even so, this is not something that we can afford to mess with. I think it better matches the description of a sea guardian ape." A sea guardian ape. Is that the legendary ape that's supposedly able to tear worms apart with its bare hands and swallow holy race beings alive? Shi Kun drew a sharp breath upon hearing this. That should be it. After all, the roar of the sea guardian ape has been vastly renowned ever since ancient times. We were most likely only able to escape alive because it wasn't directly attacking us, and we were merely in the wrong place at the wrong time, Liu Shuyer mused with a wry smile. In that case, we really are very fortunate to have escaped with our lives. If it weren't for Brother Han saving us with that ability of his, the two of us would most likely be dead by now. Shi Kun suddenly cast his gaze toward Han Li with a peculiar look in his eyes. His expression was also mirrored on Liu Shuyer's face as she said, Indeed, I didn't think that Brother Han would possess an ability capable of nullifying the roar of a sea guardian ape. It's nothing much. I just so happen to have cultivated some secret techniques that were able to provide some resistance against this beast's roar. Thankfully, we were quite far away, so we weren't afflicted by the full power of that roar. Otherwise, even I would have been in trouble as well, Han Li said in an indifferent manner. Liu Shuyer and Shikun exchanged a skeptical glance upon hearing this. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D41, letter 1D430, letter 1D6AT. Letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D55E. After a brief pause, Liu Shuyer smiled and said, "In any case, you saved me and Brother Shi. I'll have to repay you for that in the future." "Indeed, I owe you a massive favor, Brother Han," Shikun also chimed in agreement. "There's no need to take this to heart, fellow Taoists. This vast glacial realm is fraught with peril. Who knows how many beings just as or even more powerful than that sea guardian ape exist here? It's quite likely that I'll also be needing you two to save my skin from time to time during this trip," Han Li replied with a smile. "Fellow Taoist Han, you." Liu Shuyer was just about to say something else when a strange, long cry suddenly erupted in the distance alongside the thunderous roar. This was an extremely alluring cry, like the voice of an angel. The three of them were quite startled to hear this, and their conversation immediately cut off as they cast their eyes toward the distance again. From such a far distance away, even though the white mist had already been cleared by the sound waves, they were still only able to catch an indistinct glimpse of what was happening. There, they discovered that a massive purple bird was flying toward the giant ape from the opposite shore, and it was none other than that bird that was releasing the heavenly cry. It was too far away for them to get an accurate gauge of the bird's size, but it appeared to be quite comparable in stature to the giant ape. Furthermore, the bird was completely immune to the effects of the giant ape's roar, and was flying directly toward it. "That thing looks to be at least just as powerful as that sea guardian ape. We should get out of here as quickly as possible." Liu Shuyer's expression changed upon seeing this, and she immediately made a hand seal before flying away as a streak of blue light without any hesitation. Even without her reminder, Han Li and Shikun knew that a battle between two beings with such devastating powers would likely affect a massive area even beyond the direct vicinity of their battlefield. As such, they also followed suit and flew away as streaks of light behind Liu Shuyer as quickly as they could. The three streaks of light quickly vanished into the distance, and moments later, an earth-shattering roar suddenly erupted from the seashore in the distance. Immediately thereafter, the sounds of fierce winds and thunderclaps intertwined, creating a rumbling commotion that drowned out the roar of the sea guardian ape and the cry of the giant bird. Almost at the exact same moment, a gargantuan wave that was over 10,000 feet tall swept forth in a frenzy from the seashore, completely inundating the spot where Han Li's trio had been standing mere moments later. At this point, Han Li's trio had already fled to several hundred kilometers away, then changed direction and flew back toward land after going around in a massive loop. After the three of them finally flew safely onto land, Shikun heaved a faint sigh of relief as he said, "This vast glacial realm really is just as the rumors proclaim it to be. There are so many ancient beasts here that have already gone extinct long ago in our spirit realm. If we keep encountering these beings during our journey, we'll most likely dead before we even get to the restricted ruins." His voice wasn't very loud, but at Han Li and Liu Shuyer's cultivation bases, they were naturally able to hear him quite clearly. "There are indeed some ancient beasts here, but it's not like they're all over the place. It's most likely the case that we were simply unlucky and stumbled upon the battlefield between two powerful ancient beasts," Liu Shuyer said with a shake of her head. "Is it really just bad luck? This is quite a bad start to the journey," Shikun said with a resigned shrug. "Cultivators like us are beings who defy the natural order, so we can't completely ignore things like omens, but there's no need to take them completely seriously, either," Liu Shuyer said with a faint smile. "Hee, I certainly hope so," Shikun chuckled in response. At the sight of Shikun's unconvinced expression, Liu Shuyer spoke no further on this matter, turning to Han Li instead as she said, "Brother Han, we need to ascertain our location in this vast glacial realm first, and we'll need you to be on lookout duty for us." After the events that had unfolded earlier, Liu Shuyer was clearly being more polite to Han Li. "No problem," Han Li replied with a nod. He was rather curious about how these two were going to ascertain their current location. After that, he rose up into the air as a streak of azure light, reaching altitudes in excess of 1,000 feet before revealing himself again. His spiritual sense was then released, covering the entire area in a radius of several tens of kilometers around them. Liu Shuyer nodded with a pleased look on her face before turning to Shikun as she said, "Let's begin, fellow Taoist Shi." "He, I've already got everything prepared," Shikun replied without any hesitation. Thus, Liu Shuyer and Shikun abruptly flew away in different directions, then stopping after several hundred had been opened up between them. Thus, the three of them ended up in a massive, triangular formation. At this moment, Liu Shuyer and Shikun both swept their sleeves through the air, releasing a white disc and a yellow scroll, respectively. The two of them made hand seals while chanting something, and the disc swelled to over 10 times its original size, looking as if it were a massive moon. Meanwhile, the yellow scroll slowly unfurled to reveal a burst of yellow light, and there seemed to be something lurking within the scroll. All of a sudden, yellow light flashed, and the entire scroll disappeared. In the next instant, specks of yellow light surfaced in the air within a radius of over 1,000 feet, and these specks of light flashed before combining as one to form a yellow light barrier that obscured the entire sky. Shikun let loose a low cry upon seeing this before pointing a finger at the artificial moon. Pure white light swirled around it before disappearing into the yellow light barrier, and the chanting from Liu Shuyer and Shikun began to grow louder. A peculiar scene then ensued. A loud buzzing sound rang out from the yellow light barrier, following which a series of mountains, rivers, and lakes appeared all over its surface. These landmarks were all extremely tiny, but also remarkably lifelike, and it was quite easy to see the differences between the landmarks. These miniatures images were then split up into blocks that were each around 10 feet in size, creating quite an intriguing sight to behold. Han Li was naturally able to see the entire light barrier from his vantage point up above, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he asked, "What is that?" "This is a vast glacial map that my master and senior Duan refined after collating all of the geographic data collected by the beings who came into the vast glacial realm before us. I wouldn't dare to proclaim that it's a comprehensive map of the entire realm, but around 70% to 80% of the entire realm can be seen in this map," Liu Shuyer explained. "What we have to do now is ascertain whether we're actually situated in one of the areas included in the map. If not, then things may be a little troublesome for us," Shikun said as he pointed a finger at the light barrier. Brilliant yellow light immediately began to radiate from the entire map, following which an egg-sized spot of white light suddenly emerged from a corner of the map, then hovered over a certain block. After identifying the area that the white ball of light had settled over, Liu Shuyer's voice trembled slightly as he said, "That's it, we're situated on the border of the myriad foul ridge, which means we just emerged from the eight-omened sea." Shikun's expression also changed drastically upon hearing this. Han Li was appraising the white ball of light down below with a curious look in his eyes, and he drew a sharp breath after hearing Liu Shuyer's words. Seeing as they were preparing to enter the vast glacial realm, he'd naturally read many tomes with information regarding the realm, particularly about the renowned perilous locations here, in case he were to stumble into one of them and lose his life there. The myriad foul ridge and the eight-omened sea were two of the more renowned areas that he'd read about. As the name suggested, the eight-omened sea, which they just passed through, was a region of the sea where 8 legendary ancient beasts resided. As for the myriad foul ridge, there were tens of thousands of spirit birds that resided here, 3 of which were ancient beasts that were no less powerful than the sea guardian ape. These two areas directly neighbored one another, so this was naturally a very unlucky area to have ended up in. Thus, all 3 of them fell silent with their brows furrowed, as they stared at the giant light barrier in a grim manner. "I don't want to have to travel through the myriad foul ridge. Not even taking into account the 3 ancient birds there, if even the other spirit birds there were to notice us, we'd be swarmed and killed for sure," Shikun said with a dark expression. "The myriad foul ridge is indeed extremely perilous. Even though we managed to make it out of the eight-omened sea safely, that doesn't mean we'll have the same luck in the myriad foul ridge, so let's go around it," Han Li chimed in agreement. Liu Shuyer glanced at Han Li and Shikun before heaving a faint sigh as she said, "Looks like we have no choice but to do that." Seeing as everyone was on the same page, Shikun's expression eased slightly, but his brows were still tightly furrowed as he appraised the giant light barrier. Directly neighboring the myriad foul ridge are the Blue Sun Desert and the Dark Beast Forest. There's no need for us to even consider the Blue Sun Desert, For upper race beings like us, that place is even more fearsome than the myriad foul ridge. According to records, we'll only be able to withstand the power of the sunlight there for half a day at most before we're incinerated into ashes. In contrast, the Dark Beast Forest contains the Dark Beast race, which has been extinct for a long time in our spirit realm. During the nighttime, these dark beasts become several times more powerful than they are during the day, so it's also a very perilous place to traverse through. However, it appears that this is the only option open to us, Liu Shuyer said in a slow voice as she pointed at the light barrier. We can't do that. There are very few records about dark beasts, which means that very few people have made it out alive from the Dark Beast Forest, so it's still too dangerous for us to go through it. It's best to go around that area as well, Shikun immediately objected. How do you propose we do that? The restricted ruins are already extremely far away from us, so it'll take us 3 or 4 months to get there even if we enjoy a completely smooth journey. If we encounter some obstacles along the way, that number could quite easily double. Just going around the myriad foul ridge will take close to an extra month, and the Dark Beast Forest is even larger in area, which means it'll take us close to 2 additional months to go around it. On top of that, we need to save a month or two in order to make our breakthroughs. How will we be able to get there in time, then break the restriction if we keep going around everything? Liu Shuyer countered in a cold voice. A hesitant look appeared on Shikun's face upon hearing this. The Dark Beast Forest does indeed appear to be quite perilous, but there have been beings who have traversed through it in the past. In any case, our records do include some information about how to better handle these creatures in battle, so we should have an even better chance of passing through the forest than those who came before us. Besides, if we go back empty-handed, are you not afraid of being punished by Senior Duan, fellow Taoist Shi? Liu Shuyer continued with a cold look in her eyes. Shikun was still rather hesitant, and he suddenly turned to Han Li as he asked, "What do you think, fellow Taoist Han?" I was asked to come here by the 2 seniors and was promised quite a handsome reward for my efforts, so I'm willing to go anywhere as long as it doesn't spell certain death, Han Li replied in a calm manner. After a moment of careful contemplation, Shikun suddenly chuckled. All right, seeing as neither of you fear the Dark Beast Forest, I'll also tag along and see just how fearsome these legendary dark beasts are. Liu Shuyer's expression eased slightly upon hearing his response, and her voice also softened slightly as she said, "Seeing as you've come around as well, we need to work together to pass through this Dark Beast Forest. I'm sure we'll be able to succeed in that endeavor with our combined powers." "Hee, I certainly hope so," Shikun chuckled in response. Thus, after a brief discussion, the 3 of them continued flying toward a certain direction along the seashore. In the blink of eye, they disappeared into the distance, but not long after they'd left. 2 streaks of light, one yellow and one red, appeared on the seashore in a flash. The lights receded to reveal 2 foreign beings in different attire, and both of them had rather strange appearances. One was short and portly, wearing an oversized suit of black armor that almost encompassed his entire head. His companion was tall and thin, giving off the appearance of a dried corpse, but he was also wearing an oversized set of robes, making it appear as if both of them had suffered bizarre wardrobe malfunctions. These 2 were among the few heavenly cloud beings that had remained at the spot where they'd first entered the realm following the departure of Han Li's trio. Both of them were quite disheveled and wore extremely dark expressions on their faces. The short and portly was drenched in sweat, and there was still a hint of lingering fear in his eyes as he said, "What terrible luck! I can't believe we encountered 2 ancient beasts at once. If it weren't for the fact that they were too busy battling one another to pay any heed to us, there's no way we would have survived that ordeal. Even so, we still had to detonate several treasures just to get away." The short and portly being was clearly feeling very dejected that he'd had to waste his treasures under such unfortunate circumstances. HMPH, we're already immensely lucky to have been able to escape alive from those 2 ancient beasts. However, this region of the sea really is quite strange. Not only did we get trapped in that strange mist for over 10 days, we encountered those 2 ancient beasts right after we escaped out of the mist, the tall and thin being said in a grim voice. "Thank heavens we finally made it out of the sea. This set of mountain ranges up ahead should be safer, right?" The short and portly being cast his gaze toward the mountain ranges up ahead with an indecisive look on his face. "Our position disc was completely ineffective in the sea. Let's see if it can locate us now that we're on land," the short and thin being suggested after a brief pause. "All right, I'll check right away." The short and portly being nodded before opening his mouth to expel a smooth jade disc. The object rotated in midair before expanding to around 10 feet in size. At the same time, white light was shimmering all over its surface, and something seemed to be emerging from it. The short and portly being suddenly expelled a ball of blood essence, which transformed into a cloud of blood mist. He then made a series of quick hand seals before pointing a finger at the blood mist, and it vanished into the jade disk. Bright crimson light began to emanate from the disk, and some features seemed to have appeared on its surface. The two beings immediately began to appraise the disk with rapt focus. However, their expressions only darkened even further a few moments later. "What's going on? The disk still isn't able to ascertain our rough location," the tall and thin being murmured. "Either we're in a special area where the positioning disk can't function, or the two ancient beasts nearby have stirred up the world's origin chi here, thereby impacting the positioning disk. This disk is quite useful, but it still can't compare with those few legendary treasures," the short and portly being said after a moment of contemplation. "HMPH, if I'd known it was this useless, I wouldn't have paid such a high price to purchase it during that auction. We spent most of the spirit stones we'd saved up on this thing." The tall and thin being was clearly rather agitated. "This thing fails to work from time to time, but without it, there would be no way for us to ascertain our location in this realm. Everyone else paid the same price to purchase it as well, didn't they? Only crystal beings know how to refine this thing, and every time the vast glacial realm opens, they profit greatly from this invention. I've heard that crystal beings can also refine better positioning treasures, but I'm not sure if that's true." The short and portly being was also rather dejected. "So be it, there's no use complaining now. Seeing as this thing can't tell us our current location, let's just get out of here first," the thin and tall being suggested after scanning his spiritual sense carefully through the mountain ranges up ahead. "I guess we have no choice." His companion nodded after a brief hesitation. Thus, the two of them rose up into the air, quickly flying into the distance. Moments later, they vanished into the mountain ranges, and no one ever heard from or saw them again. In the air above a forest, three heavenly cloud beings had combined into one streak of three-colored spiritual light while hurtling through the air. Behind them were a dozen or so beasts, with lion bodies and elk heads giving chase in hot pursuit. Even further away, several strange humanoid beings with long white fur growing all over their bodies were flying less than 100 feet in the air above a certain glacier. The sharp blade-like snowflakes and the icy winds that could instantly freeze a normal being solid didn't affect these humanoid beings in the slightest, and they quickly vanished into the distance. Deep within a lush forest, two green-robed men with skin that resembled dried yellow tree bark were waving a small red flag each toward a giant tree that was over 100 feet tall up ahead. The giant tree was remarkably green, but there was a sinister ghoul-like face right at the center of its trunk. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D5 6 3, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D5 5 6, letter 1D5 6 8, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D5 F0, letter 1D6 9 8, letter 1D4 6. At this moment, the entire tree was enshrouded in scorching flames, and the sinister face letting loose shrill shrieks while blasting forth bursts of green liquid to resist the flames. A dozen or so extremely thick tree roots were also flailing violently from the soil around the base of the tree, slamming into the ground with devastating force, leaving trenches that were several feet deep in their wake. If these were normal flames, then perhaps these tree roots really would have been enough to douse them. However, these flames were seemingly inextinguishable, and they clung firmly to the tree roots like projections. Moments later, the amount of green liquid being expelled by the massive tree was starting to dwindle, and it no longer had the power to resist the surrounding flames. Its shrill cries came to an abrupt halt, and it was incinerated into a pile of ashes. The two green-robed men withdrew their flags upon seeing this, then flew over to the pile of ashes before leaning down and pulling out a green crystal each. The two men glanced at one another upon seeing this, and both of them could see their own elation mirrored in each other's eyes. In a certain secluded corner of the vast glacial realm, there were a dozen or so male and female horned beings huddled together above a boundless desert. All of them were listening to something that was being said by a young man with three short golden horns growing on his head, and from the stunned expressions on their faces, it seemed that they'd heard something extremely incredible. However, as the young man swept his gaze across his companions, all of them lowered their heads in a display of awe and veneration. "All of you are clear about our true objective here, right? In order to ensure our success, our elders have used a profound heavenly treasure to refine 5 extraordinary treasures for us, and even made use of several spies we'd planted in the heavenly cloud races to draw the attention of their higher-ups. I'm sure all of you are aware of what awaits us when we get back if we can accomplish this, so I won't speak any further about that," the golden-horned young man said in a calm voice. All of the other horned beings were quite excited to hear this, and they replied in unison, "Rest assured, all of us will do everything in our power to achieve this objective." "Very good. I've been cultivating in the sacred mountain all along, so I haven't known all of you for very long. However, the future prosperity of our race hinges on this, so I'm sure all of you will be giving it your all. We have more than 10 teams that entered the vast glacial realm this time, but only the 5 teams that possess one of the 5 treasures have been assigned this task. All of the other teams are only responsible for assisting us and providing decoys so the other races don't see through what we're doing. For now, let's set off as we'd originally planned," the golden-horned man instructed with a pleased nod. Thus, the group of Jiaokai beings followed him deeper into the desert. In the air above a lake, there were 2 foreign mermaid-like beings standing next to one another. Before them was a monstrous whale that was over 100 feet in length. There were 9 golden eyes on its forehead, and it was appraising the 2 beings with an extremely astonishing aura emanating from its body. Among the 2 foreign beings, the man had a pair of silver eyes, while the woman had a pair of golden eyes that were rather similar to those of the monstrous whale. The whale was in the process of letting loose a low roar as it appraised the 2 beings at the same time with its 9 eyes, putting on quite an antagonistic display. Both of the foreign beings wore grim expressions upon seeing this, and after a brief conversation, the woman's golden eyes flashed, and she suddenly let loose a sound that was quite similar to the whale's roar. The monstrous whale blinked all 9 of its eyes in unison, and it seemed to have become rather hesitant upon hearing this sound. The woman's expression eased upon seeing this, but she didn't stop what she was doing, even for a single instant. Instead, her roar was only growing louder than before. All of a sudden, the monstrous whale's roar cut off, and golden light flashed in its eyes before its massive body swayed, following which it flew a few laps around the 2 beings. After returning to its original spot, it let loose another low roar, and on this occasion, an elated look appeared on the woman's face upon hearing this. She immediately flew into the air above the monstrous whale, then slowly settled onto its back. This seemingly extremely powerful whale reacted in quite a benevolent manner, allowing the woman to ride atop its back before flying away as a streak of blue light at her behest. The woman's male companion naturally followed along closely behind them. Even though dark beasts weren't the most powerful beasts in the vast glacial realm, even an ancient beast definitely didn't want to face a pack of mature dark beasts at night. For some reason, it was night time in the dark beast forest for about 2/3 of the day, leaving very few remaining hours of daylight in contrast. There were thousands of dark beasts living in the forest, and quite a large proportion of them were mature dark beasts. As such, even though the dark beast forest directly neighbored the myriad foul ridge and the 8 omens sea, none of the powerful ancient beasts nearby had any intention of invading the forest. This forest was like the backyard of the dark beasts, and virtually all of the other beasts that resided within it could only act as prey to the dark beasts. There were a few other types of beasts that also enjoyed enhancements during the night, and only they could pose some threat to the dark beasts, but they were all far inferior to the dark beasts both in terms of numbers, as well as individual powers. On this day, close to 100 kilometers away from the border of the dark beast forest, there was a giant python that was 70 to 80 feet in length with azure scales all over its body, facing off against a dark beast in a tense confrontation. This python appeared to be no different from a normal python, but in reality, it was one of the types of beasts in the dark beast forest that could challenge the dark beasts. These types of pythons were known as azure night pythons, and at night, their already powerful bodies would become significantly enhanced, and they would also draw upon the power of the night to enter what was essentially a berserk state. After undergoing a berserk transformation, these giant pythons possessed powers that were comparable to that of mature dark beasts, and they were extremely ferocious and bloodthirsty in battle. However, this type of transformation naturally also presented many negative aftereffects to these azure night pythons. Not only would they be severely debilitated within the next few years, their lifespans would also be reduced. As such, none of them would undergo such a transformation unless they found themselves in grave danger. Unfortunately for these azure night pythons, their inner cores were extremely beneficial for dark beasts to consume, so if they were to encounter one another in the dark beast forest, a battle to the death would immediately ensue. This was exactly what was happening right now. The azure night python had its head raised up high, and it was flicking its dark purple forked tongue in a menacing manner. All of the azure scales on its body had also stood up on end, and it appeared to be ready to pounce at a moment's notice. The dark beast that was facing off against it bore the appearance of a wolf that had swelled to 3 or 4 times its normal size. It was completely inky black in color, and its tail was long and thin, like that of a leopard, giving it a graceful and rather feline appearance. This dark beast was slightly thinner than a normal mature dark beast, so it had clearly only reached maturity not long ago. However, it wasn't backing down in the slightest as it glowered at the azure night python with ferocity flashing in its eyes. Strangely enough, the dark beast was only staring at the giant python and didn't immediately pounce toward it. Most battles between mature dark beasts and berserk azure night pythons ended with the former securing the inner core of the latter, but there were also cases where dark beasts had been devoured by azure night pythons. As such, the dark beast was naturally delighted to have encountered an azure night python here, but it didn't immediately rush into battle. A berserk azure night python would obviously become a lot more powerful, but in the instant it underwent its transformation, it would expose its weakness, and if the dark beast could take advantage of that split second of weakness, it could kill its opponent in a single well-timed strike. Meanwhile, the azure night python had adopted a pose that suggested that it was going to go berserk at a moment's notice, but in reality, it didn't dare to do anything rash either. Thus, the tense standoff continued. All of the beasts in the dark beast forest were nocturnal creatures that rested in their caves during the day. The trees here were extremely tall, and even though they were some distance away from the edge of the forest, the lush branches and leaves up above were still dense enough to almost obscure the entire sky. If one were to try and peer through these lush canopies, they'd only be greeted by the sight of a vast expanse of darkness. It was currently the darkest time in the night, and if it weren't for some glowing plants nearby, this place would have been completely pitch black. Time passed by slowly, and the standoff continued. Both of the creatures were getting rather disgruntled at this point. Finally, it was the dark beast that ran out of patience first. It let loose a low snark, and it began to slowly stalk the area around the giant python in an entirely soundless, wraith-like manner. The azure night python began to flick its forked tongue with even greater urgency upon seeing this, and at the same time, it began to hiss in a menacing manner. However, the ferocious light in the dark beast's eyes only grew more pronounced as inky black claw projections that were half a foot in length each began to appear on its front paws. At the same time, its long and thin tail began to swish through the air, leaving a trail of afterimages in its wake as it cracked like a bullwhip. The azure night python was carefully appraising the dark beast this entire time, so it naturally saw everything that the dark beast was doing. Upon seeing the dark beast whipping its tail through the air, its hissing suddenly became more urgent, as if it were being provoked. At the same time, light flashed from its dark azure scales, and its body began to swell up like a balloon, causing the entirety of its snakeskin to be stretched taut. Almost in the blink of an eye, a sharp tearing sound rang out as the entire snakeskin split open, revealing a serpentine body that was almost 1.5 times the size of the original azure night python. This was still a python with azure scales, but the patterns on those scales had become silver, and these patterns intertwined to create a series of runes of different sizes that were flashing with faint silver light. On top of that, a single horn that was as pristine white as jade had also appeared on the python's head. The horn was in a corkscrew shape, and it looked extremely sharp. The giant python's green eyes also took on a crimson hue, and they were flashing with a deranged light. Almost in the exact same instant that the giant python had completed its transformation, the dark beast immediately sprang into action. Black light flashed, and the dark beast vanished on the spot. In the next instant, black light flashed again near one side of the giant python's head, and the dark beast reappeared, seemingly out of thin air. At the same time, several black claw projections erupted forth, slashing viciously toward the python's neck. On each berserk azure night python's neck, just below their head, were several red scales. These scales could be considered to be the Achilles heel of these snakes, and even an ordinary flying sword would be able to inflict grievous wounds on these pythons if the swords were to target those scales. If the dark beast's claw projections could strike that weakness, then the battle would essentially be over. Of course, this glaring weakness wouldn't constantly be present. In the instant right after entering a berserk state, those scales would turn into the same color as the rest of the python's scales, and in fact, they'd become far more resolute than all of those other scales. A few dull thumps rang out as the claw projections struck the Azure Knight Python's body, but the giant python had instinctively dodged to evade these lethal attacks. Even so, several red bleeding gashes had been inflicted onto its neck, but they didn't appear to be very deep. Such a surprise attack naturally completely enraged the giant python, which was already in a semi-deranged state. An explosive roar of fury rang out, following which the python whipped its tail through the air, and a series of azure tail projections appeared before surging toward the dark beast. Even after failing to land a decisive blow with its surprise attack, the dark beast remained calm as it swayed, and two streaks of black light shot forth from its body before transforming into a pair of black beings. These two shadow-like beings were extremely similar in appearance to the dark beast, except their bodies were quite blurry and indistinct, and were flashing with dark gray spiritual light. As soon as they appeared, they also pounced through the air alongside the dark beast. The dark beast and its two projections then unleashed claw projections in unison, which instantly clashed with the azure projection sweeping through the air. Following an earth-shattering explosion, the projections all disappeared at the same time, and it appeared that the first clash had ended in a tie. Immediately thereafter, a ball of azure light erupted in the air above the dark beast, following which a giant python head emerged from within the light. The python head then came crashing down at an astonishing speed, swallowing one of the dark beast projections whole before hurtling toward the other one. Right at this moment, the actual dark beast emerged from the side, then opened its mouth up as wide as it would go, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth that before pouncing toward the giant python. Despite how thick the Azure Knight Python's body was, if those giant jaws were to clamp down on it, it would definitely be bitten into two halves. However, after going berserk, the Azure Knight Python's speed was not inferior to that of the Dark Beast, and it abruptly withdrew its head before also opening its cavernous mouth and turning toward the Dark Beast. At this moment, the body of its original target, the other Dark Beast projection, suddenly elongated to an incredible extent as it hurtled directly toward the Azure Knight Python. Thus, the two beasts clashed amid a string of resounding booms, and they appeared to be quite evenly matched. Unbeknownst to the two of them, a massive hole with a radius of around 20 feet had been carved into an ordinary-looking giant tree close to 10 kilometers away from them. Within the hole in the tree, there were 3 people seated inside in a cross-legged manner, appraising a mirror that was hovering in midair with rapt focus on their faces. The back of the mirror was shimmering with silver light, while the mirror of the surface was displaying an extremely clear image. The image was none other than that of the battle between the Dark Beast and the Azure Knight Python. All of the scenes in the distance had been perfectly replicated in the mirror, except everything was countless times smaller than their actual size. Among this trio, one of them was an azure-robed man, one was a woman with a white hood over her head, and the final being was a burly yellow-skinned man. These were none other than Han Li, Liu Shuyer, and Shi Kun, who had finally gotten here after close to a month. All 3 of them wore grim expressions as they stared at the mirror, with intense, unblinking eyes. Close to an hour later, the dark beast in the image had split up into hundreds of black bats that finally wore the wounded Azure Knight Python down until it died, then devoured its prey's beast core before departing in high spirits. Liu Shuyer cast an incantation seal onto the mirror, and the image disappeared as she sighed. What do you think of these dark beasts after witnessing one in action for yourselves? In a one-on-one battle, I can gain a huge advantage in just 10 breaths, and I'd be able to kill it in 30 breaths, Shi Kun replied with furrowed brows. Oh, then what if 3 or 4 of these dark beasts, or even a dozen of them, were to appear before you at once? Liu Shuyer asked with a hint of a smile on her face. If they're all this powerful, then I can't guarantee victory against more than 3 of them, and if more than 5 of them were to swarm me at once, I'd have no chance of victory. If I were to encounter more than 10 of them at once, I'd immediately run for my life, Shi Kun admitted in a begrudging manner. That's the problem. From what I've heard, there are tens of thousands of dark beasts in the Dark Beast Forest, and their powers differ greatly. According to our records, the power displayed by that dark beast earlier is slightly inferior to that of the average power level of a mature dark beast. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken so long to defeat that Azure Knight Python. Above normal dark beasts, there are also 2 higher tiers of dark beasts, one of which is the 3-eyed dark beast. Aside from the fact that they're simply a lot more powerful than normal dark beasts, their third eyes can also release a strange type of light that can reduce living beings to rotten wood. The other type of dark beast is the dark beast monarch. These dark beasts possess pure golden fur as opposed to black fur, and we don't have any information on how powerful they are. Apparently, one of our seniors who came into the vast glacial realm before us once passed through the dark beast forest, and he witnessed from afar a dark beast monarch leading a pack of hundreds of mature dark beasts galloping through the forest. Liu Shuyer said in a grim voice. I've seen similar records as well. I would estimate that I could take care of a single one of those three-eyed dark beasts, but I'm not sure if I'd be able to take on two at once. As for those golden dark beasts, they can lead packs of their kind, so they must be far more powerful than even three-eyed dark beasts. In that case, it's most likely the case that we'd be no match for them even if the three of us were to combine our powers. However, seeing as they're beast monarchs, there shouldn't be all that many of them even in the entire dark beast forest, so surely we won't be unlucky enough to encounter one, Hanley said in a slow voice. That's a valid point. We have no intention of bothering these dark beasts anyway. All we want to do is sneak through this forest, so we'll be doing our best to avoid them. It's a pity that we can't fly over this forest. Otherwise, it would only take us a few days to cross through it, Liu Shuyer sighed. It's all right, we can afford a slight delay like this. Besides, we have no other alternative anyway. If we were to try and fly over the forest, we'd quickly be surrounded by countless dark beasts at once, Hanley said with a wry smile. I'm naturally aware of that. According to our predecessors who have trekked through the dark beast forest, dark beasts are severely weaker during the day than they are during the night, so the forest is much more heavily guarded during the day. Many three-eyed dark beasts would even come out to patrol the forest during daylight hours. In contrast, fewer guards patrol the forest during the night, and all of the high-grade dark beasts will return to their caves to rest and cultivate. But the dark beasts are a lot more powerful during that time, Liu Shuyer continued. In that case, we should travel through the night, then rest during the day. I thought it'd be the other way around. Shikun was rather surprised to hear this. I also support what Fairy Liu is saying. Not only will there be more high-grade dark beasts patrolling the forest during the day, a lot of our concealment techniques will also be hampered greatly during the day, so it's very likely that we won't be able to escape the notice of those three-eyed dark beasts. After all, most beasts with additional demonic eyes have abilities that can allow them to see through illusions and concealment techniques, so that'll certainly work against our favor. Regardless of how severely debilitated dark beasts are during the day, we'll still be in a dire situation if we get surrounded by 100 at once. As such, it's better to travel during the night, Hanley said after a brief pause. That does indeed make a lot of sense. All right then, we'll travel during the night as opposed to during daylight hours. Shikun seemed to have been convinced. Liu Shuyer nodded before asking, in that case, let's set off soon. The earlier we can get through the forest, the safer we'll be. By the way, do you two have any suitable concealment techniques? Oh, from the sounds of it, you perhaps possess a superior concealment technique that can help the two us. Han Li was immediately able to read between the lines and glean the purpose behind Liu Shuyer's question. You really are a smart man, Brother Han. Prior to coming here, I borrowed 3,000 transformation faces from my master. With these treasures, we can transform into anything we want, and no one will be able to discover anything amiss unless they were to carefully inspect us with their spiritual sense. I know that the two of you must also have other brilliant concealment techniques, but these treasures are perfect for this situation. Even if we get discovered by other dark beasts, we'll be able to conceal ourselves with these treasures. Liu Shuyer explained with a smile as she flipped a hand over to produce 3 thin silver objects. 1,000 transformation faces. These treasures are extremely renowned, and I've heard that only your master knows how to refine them. If you're willing to lend them to us, then that would naturally be fantastic. Shikun was elated at the sight of the 3 thin treasures, and he immediately made a grabbing motion to draw one of them into his grasp before carefully appraising it. Han Li hadn't stayed in Cloud City for a very long time, so it was the first time he'd heard of this treasure. However, it was quite apparent from Shikun's excited reaction that these were definitely no ordinary treasures. Thus, he expressed his gratitude toward Liu Shuyer before also grabbing one of the treasures and inspecting it with a curious look on his face. This so-called 1,000 transformation face was as thin as a silk handkerchief, yet slightly warm to the touch. Even with Han Li's vast wealth of knowledge and experience, he was unable to identify what kind of material this treasure was refined from. However, there were a few pea-sized silver runes of different sizes inscribed onto the surface of the treasure, and they immediately caught his eye. After focusing his gaze on the silver runes, Han Li's expression changed ever so slightly, but his reaction still didn't escape the notice of Liu Xiuya. A peculiar look flashed through her eyes as she asked, "Brother Han, have you seen this treasure before?" Han Li's heart stirred slightly, but his expression had already returned to normal as he replied, "This is a treasure that can only be refined by Senior Kai, so of course I've never had the chance to see it before." "Then what was your reaction just then?" Liu Xiuya wasn't willing to let the issue slide. The material used for this treasure is very unique. I thought myself to be quite knowledgeable, but I don't have the slightest inkling what this material could step from, and I'm feeling rather embarrassed," Han Li explained with a nonchalant smile. Liu Xiuya seemed to have believed Han Li's excuse, and she explained, "I see. I don't know the refinement method, but I've heard from Master that these treasures were refined through combining the skins of 7 types of extremely rare spirit beasts, so it's no wonder that you can't identify the material used." "Thank you for telling me this," Han Li replied as he feigned an expression of enlightenment. At the same time, he was gently stroking the silver runes on the treasure, while many thoughts surged through his mind. The silver runes on this 1,000 transformation face were none other than beveled silver text, and it was naturally very surprising to him to see this text here. If this was a treasure that only Kai Ling knew how to refine, did that mean that she also had an outer page of the golden jade tome? Just as he was thinking this, Liu Xiuya continued, "These treasures are quite extraordinary, but the transformations won't happen as soon as you put them on. If you want to transform into another living being, it would be best to obtain some of its blood, flesh, or skin first. If you could obtain the entire hide of a beast, the transformation would be absolutely perfect. It shouldn't be that hard to find complete beast hides. We'll just have to find a few dark beasts and kill them. The one that we just saw would be perfect for this. In such a short time, it couldn't have gotten very far away." Shikun chuckled. A ferocious look flashed through his eyes. Immediately thereafter, yellow light flashed beneath his feet, and he slowly sunk into the ground. Liu Xiuya's eyes flashed upon seeing this, but she didn't say anything to stop him in the end. Thus, Shikun unleashed his earth movement technique and vanished in the blink of an eye. "There won't be any issues letting Brother Shi go on his own, will there?" Liu Xiuya asked in a low voice as she glanced at Han Li. "Seeing as you didn't say anything to stop him, you must be of the opinion that everything should be fine, and I also think the same. We've already carefully assessed this area and ascertained that there are no other dark beasts within a radius of 50 kilometers. On top of that, fellow Taoist Shi has the element of surprise on his side, so this should be an easy task for him," Han Li replied in a calm manner. Liu Xiuya fell silent upon seeing this. An hour later, yellow light flashed from the spot where Shikun had disappeared, and a humanoid figure emerged from the ground. It was none other than Shikun himself. As soon as he emerged, he smiled at Han Li and Liu Xiuya, then abruptly swept a sleeve through the air, upon which a black object flew out from within. It was none other than a complete set of dark beast hide. "Fellow Taoist Liu, do you think this beast hide is suitable for me to use?" Shikun asked in a proud manner. After briefly appraising the sheet of beast hide, Liu Xiuya smiled and replied, "It doesn't have any wounds on it at all. In that case, there would naturally be no issues. I'll teach both of you the mantra and you can give it a try, Brother Shi." After that, she tossed back the sheet of beast hide, then transmitted her voice to Han Li and Shikun, teaching them a profound mantra. Han Li and the Shikun naturally listened with rapt focus and committed the mantra to memory. Moments later, Liu Xiuya's voice transmission trailed off, and Shikun's eyes lit up as he tossed the beast hide in his hands into the air, following which he raised both hands at once. The 1,000 transformation face vanished into the beast hide as a ball of silver light, following which a series of silver runes appeared. The entire sheet of dark beast hide then descended onto his body. Silver light flashed, and as soon as Shikun was encompassed within the sheet of beast hide, he transformed into a living dark beast. He had the same black fur and identical sharp claws as those of the dark beast from before. "This is incredible. I almost don't feel any different, yet I've completely transformed into another being." Shikun inspected his front paws with amazement before bursting into laughter. "If the 1,000 transformation faces didn't have such abilities, I wouldn't have brought them out for you two to use," Liu Xiuya said with a smile. "Thank you, fellow Taoist Liu. With these treasures, all of us will have flawless disguises for the journey up ahead, the dark beast said with an elated expression. After witnessing Shikun's transformation, Han Li also became quite confident in these treasures, and after expressing his gratitude to Liu Shuye again, he suggested, Fairy Liu and I still don't have beast hides at the moment, but it won't be good to delay any further. Why don't we set off, and if we encounter any dark beast stragglers, we can pick them off along the way. My thoughts exactly, Brother Han. We're on a tight schedule, so it's naturally best not to waste any time, Liu Shuye immediately agreed. Shikun didn't have any objections to this either, so the three of them crept silently out of the hold in the tree and into the night. After that, Shikun expelled a yellow cloud from his mouth, and his body instantly transformed into a burst of faint yellow qi. The dark beast forest had extremely low visibility to begin with at night, and after unleashing this technique, it would be impossible for anyone to discover Shikun's presence unless they were to look carefully at him from within 100 feet away. Meanwhile, Liu Shuye removed a jade pendant-like treasure from around her waist, and she tossed it into the air, upon which it transformed into a pristine white mouse that was around 10 feet in length. Her body then swayed, and she drifted onto the mouse's back, following which faint white light began to emanate from its body, enshrouding both itself and Liu Shuye within. The two gradually turned transparent in the white light, transforming into a barely visible transparent shadow in the end. As for Han Li, the measures he took were even simpler. After the latest refinement, his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords had become pure wood attribute treasures, and in a forest with such abundant wood attribute spiritual qi, it was extremely easy for him to conceal himself with his swords. As such, he raised an arm, and a small azure sword shot forth out of his sleeve, then transformed into a streak of azure light that was several tens of feet in length before sweeping toward his body. Moments later, a barely visible streak of azure light shot forth through the air. Thus, the three of them officially began their journey into the dark beast forest in a discreet and stealthy manner. Several days later, a thin dark beast was slowly treading over a thick bed of leaves and branches as it traversed through the forest in a graceful manner. All of a sudden, a burst of blue light flew toward it from a nearby tree, then swept up its entire body. The female dark beast was naturally quite alarmed, and it let loose a sharp cry as it sent several black claw projections hurtling toward the blue light. However, the blue light merely swirled before transforming into a massive ball of light that completely encapsulated the female dark beast's body. As such, the sharp cries escaping from its mouth became completely inaudible to those outside the ball of light, and its sharp claws were also only able to send a few ripples surging through the blue light without actually being able to penetrate through it. At this moment, white light flashed from the massive tree, and a gorgeous figure emerged from within. It was none other than Liu Shuye. She was making a hand seal with one hand while carrying a fist-sized blue crystal ball in her other hand, and she was chanting something at the same time. A peculiar scene then unfolded. The blue ball of light slowly spread in all directions at her behest, forming a blue light barrier that covered a full acre in mere moments. After that, she stowed away the blue crystal ball in her hand, following her body swayed, and she vanished into the light barrier as a white shadow. The dark beast within the light barrier immediately pounced toward her without any hesitation, and along the way, it manifested three more identical black shadows. However, Liu Shuye remained completely unflustered as she opened her mouth to expel a clump of thin blue threads, which dispersed to form a blue net of light that surged toward the dark beast and its projections. The dark beast also opened its mouth to blast forth a pillar of black light upon seeing this, then slashed its claws through the air in a menacing manner, conjuring up countless claw projections that hurtled directly toward the massive blue net. A string of resounding booms rang out as black and blue light intertwined with one another amid a series of explosions. However, the loud commotion and violent spiritual qi fluctuations were all greatly buffered by the light barrier, making it almost impossible to hear the battle from outside. Thus, Liu Shuye and the dark beast engaged in battle. Outside the blue light barrier, azure light and yellow qi flashed, following which Han Li and Shikun emerged in unison. Both of them were staring at the blue light barrier with different expressions on their faces. Fellow Taoist Liu Shuye is picky, refusing to go with any target other than a female dark beast. Shikun chuckled with a shake of his head. I'm sure she has her considerations, Han Li replied in a calm manner. As a woman, it makes sense that fellow Taoist Liu is averse to adopting the form of a male dark beast, but I'm quite curious about why you decided against killing the dark beast that we encountered 2 days ago. Shikun continued as a peculiar look appeared in his eyes. That dark beast was already riddled with wounds, so even if I were to secure its hide, it wouldn't look right after I transform into it, so I decided to wait for the next one we encounter instead, Han Li explained in an indifferent voice. I see. I thought you let it go out of the kindness of your heart after seeing the cubs that were traveling with that wounded dark beast. But then again, cultivators like us are beyond such shallow thoughts, Shikun said in a nonchalant manner. Han Li merely smiled and offered no response to this. Just as the two of them were chatting with one another, a dull thump suddenly rang out from within the blue light barrier, following which the entire barrier tremored slightly, but immediately settled again. Han Li was slightly startled by this, as was Shikun. All of a sudden, the blue light barrier suddenly shattered, then vanished as specks of spiritual light. At the very center of the light barrier stood Liu Xiuye, and beside her lay the female dark beast in a completely motionless manner. Its fur was rather wet, but there was not a single wound on its body. And Li only had to scan this beast with his spiritual sense to know that it was definitely already dead. Nicely done. I didn't think your water attribute abilities would be so potent, fellow Taoist Liu. You took care of that beast even faster than I slew mine a few days ago, Shikun praised as he clicked his tongue with wonder. Liu Xiuye raised a hand to draw the dark beast into her grasp, then smiled as she replied, "There's no need to flatter me, brother Shi. Fellow Taoist Han and I have both witnessed the power of your body, and my little tricks certainly can't compare with your immense strength." Haha, if your abilities are nothing more than little tricks, then my pitiful abilities are even less than that. Fellow Taoist Han, both Fairy Liu and myself have obtained beast hides, so you're the only one left now. The deeper we go into this forest, the greater the probability that we'll encounter packs of dark beasts, so you need to think about how to proceed from here, Shikun said to Han Li with a meaningful look on his face. Rest assured, brother Shi, I definitely won't be playing games with my life on the line, Han Li replied with a faint smile. 3 days later, beside a small creek in the dark beast forest, a dark beast that was around 30% larger than the average dark beast had been enshrouded under an azure light barrier. Han Li hovered in the air above with his eyes closed, making a series of hand seals that were causing the light barrier to fluctuate in brightness erratically. Both Liu Xiuye and Shikun stood beside the barrier, and the two of them were quite stunned by what they were seeing. Not only was the azure light barrier so dense that it felt as if it were a substantial structure that completely impeded their vision, even their spiritual sense was repelled when they tried to detect what was happening within the barrier. This was none other than the Spring Dawn sword formation that Han Li had set up. All of a sudden, Han Li raised an eyebrow as he hovered in midair, and he ceased making hand seals. He then swept a sleeve downward and uttered the word "withdraw." The azure light barrier immediately dissipated, reverting back to several tens of azure flying swords, each of which was several feet in length. And Li made a grabbing motion, and all of the flying swords shrank down to several inches in size amid a flash of azure light. They hurtled directly toward him before quickly vanishing into his body. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D42B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D5FA. At this point, the massive dark beast below the light barrier was already dead, and it was sprawled onto the ground with blood flowing from all 7 of its orifices. Liu Xiuye and Shikun couldn't help but exchange a glance upon seeing this, and they could see their own wariness mirrored in each other's eyes. Han Li had naturally also caught sight of what they were doing, but he merely descended slowly and landed beside the dark beast carcass. Fellow Taoists, with this dark beast hide, we can now venture deep into the forest without taking as many precautionary measures as before, Han Li said with a smile. Of course, it's just that I didn't think that your most powerful ability would be a legendary sword formation, brother Han. The two of us couldn't see anything that was happening inside, but just the fact that it was able to block our spiritual sense indicates that it's quite a profound formation, Liu Xiuye said with a wry smile. Indeed, you took slightly longer than the two of us to kill your prey as you had to lure it into the sword formation before killing it, but no sound or fluctuations escaped during the process whatsoever, and that further exemplifies how incredible this sword formation is. With this ability up your sleeve, I doubt you'd encounter many opponents below the holy race that would be able to best you, Shikun also praised in a heartfelt manner. There's no need to flatter me, fellow Taoists. My Spring Dawn sword formation does indeed possess some power, but I'm sure the two of you haven't even begun to show the extent your powers. Otherwise, the two seniors wouldn't have entrusted you two with such an important task. In the face of your powers, my sword formation is nothing to boast about. Han Li chuckled nonchalantly. Shikun faltered slightly before bursting into laughter as he said, I'm sure your powers aren't inferior to ours, fellow Taoist Han. In any case, we should stop praising one another and discuss the more important matters at hand. If we continue onward for a day or two, we'll truly be entering the depths of the Dark Beast Forest, which is where most of the Dark Beasts reside. If we want to pass through this area, we have to be on high alert the entire time. When passing through the central region of the forest, make sure you don't try to kill any straggling dark beasts. Our restrictions will be able to fool normal dark beasts, but high-grade three-eyed dark beasts will immediately sense that something is amiss as soon as we try to use our powers. On top of that, we won't be able to release our spiritual sense over large areas deep in the forest, so if a battle were to break out, we'd be in a lot of danger, Liu Shuyer said in a grim voice. Even if we're forced into a battle, we can't delay for so long like we're doing now. We have to attack all at once to try and kill the enemy on the spot in an instant. Only then will we be minimizing the risk of blowing our covers, Shikun added in a solemn manner. Indeed, if we were to come up against a normal dark beast, it shouldn't be too difficult for the three of us to kill it in an instant. However, I can't say the same if we were to encounter high-grade dark beasts, Han Li said as he stroked his chin. If we really do get targeted by a high-grade dark beast, then that's when our divine essence-fused light combination technique would come in useful, Liu Shuyer reminded with a smile. I almost forgot about that secret technique. With that up our sleeves, we won't have to fear even high-grade dark beasts as long as we don't encounter too many of them, Shikun chuckled as he rubbed his hands together with glee. However, that ability has to only be used as a last resort. If we were to unleash it, it would definitely cause a massive commotion that would result in a large number of high-grade dark beasts pursuing us at once, Han Li said with a concerned shake of his head. Rest assured, Brother Shi and I are well aware of that. Seeing as you've also obtained a dark beast hide, let's all transform and set off. It would be best if we were to open up some distance between one another. Otherwise, it would be rather eye-catching if we were to travel as a group of three, Liu Shuyer suggested. That's a valid point, Fairy Liu. In that case, I'll be going on ahead first, Shikun said with a quick nod. He then made a hand seal, and that black beast hide abruptly appeared over his body. A ball of silver light then shot forth from within his sleeve before disappearing into the beast hide in a flash. Thus, he transformed into a dark beast again, and his four paws dug into the ground, propelling him through the forest like an arrow. Han Li and Liu Shuyer also immediately followed suit upon seeing this, transforming into a pair of dark beasts that set off in hot pursuit. Along the way, the three of them activated their concealment treasures to hide themselves once again. Thus, it would be very difficult to discover the three of them, especially in the dark beast forest, which had very low visibility during the night. After that, Han Li's trio proceeded cautiously onward, skirting around an area as soon as they discovered any powerful beasts there, trying to minimize their contact with other creatures in the forest. During the first few days, they didn't encounter dark beasts on too many occasions, but they rarely ever appeared on their own, and most of them traveled in groups of 2 or 3. After about a week or so, they had traveled to the true central region of the forest, and dark beasts were beginning to appear in groups of 5 or 6, and even packs that numbered in excess of 10. This was rather alarming to Han Li's trio, and they began to proceed with even greater caution. Thankfully, they were able to rely on their profound movement techniques and superior magic power to fool these dark beasts, and no mishaps occurred. Perhaps they were simply lucky or something was happening within the dark beast forest. In any case, they didn't even encounter a single high-grade three-eyed dark beast on the way here, thereby allowing them to travel smoothly all the way into the very center of the dark beast forest. If things were to continue like this for the next 3 to 4 days, they would have passed through the most dangerous region of the dark beast forest at that point, and they'd be able to heave a sigh of relief. However, at present, Han Li and the others were all quite tense, and they wore rather grim expressions on their faces. All three of them were vastly knowledgeable and experienced beings, and even though they were quite glad that they hadn't encountered any high-grade dark beasts in the forest, their past experiences told them that this was not necessarily a good thing. As they continued to forge on ahead, even the number of normal dark beasts they encountered dwindled significantly. During the next 2 days, they only encountered a dozen or so dark beasts during their travels. This was quite alarming to Han Li's trio, and they became even warier of the situation. Han Li was quickly traveling through the forest in a wraith-like manner, passing through all obstacles like giant trees in his path in a completely soundless manner as an azure shadow. This kind of movement technique naturally allowed him to travel extremely quickly. However, his brows were tightly furrowed, and faint blue light was flashing within his eyes as he constantly surveyed his surroundings. This was the central region of the forest, so he naturally didn't dare to release his spiritual sense. As such, he could only use his bright-sight spirit eyes to detect dark beasts and take measures to avoid them in advance. He didn't know what kind of methods Liu Xiuye and Shi Kun were employing, but they were reacting just as quickly as he was whenever dark beasts appeared up ahead. This came as quite a surprise to Han Li. Could it be that they'd also cultivated some kind of profound sensory ability, or were using treasures to accomplish this? In any case, Han Li's appraisal of their powers was increased once again upon seeing this. With that in mind, Han Li inspected his surrounding area, and with his spirit eye ability, he was able to tell that Liu Xiuye and Shi Kun were over 1,000 feet away on either side of him. Both of them were also traveling very quickly through the forest, and after ascertaining that they'd encountered no issues, Han Li's expression eased slightly as he withdrew his gaze again. However, right at this moment, a sudden turn of events abruptly unfolded. A golden shadow suddenly shot forth out of the darkness right ahead of them. After just a single flash, it covered a distance over several hundred feet, taking it over to Shi Kun before it crashed headfirst into his body. Shi Kun was naturally extremely alarmed by this, but he'd been caught completely off guard and simply had no time to evade. As such, he had no choice but to conjure up a protective barrier of spiritual qi amid a flash of bright yellow light. An earth-shattering boom rang out, and golden and yellow light intertwined before the golden shadow stumbled backward a few steps, but then immediately righted itself. In contrast, the dark beast that Shi Kun had transformed into was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing into a large tree several hundred feet away with vicious force. Only after the entire tree had snapped in half from the force of the impact did he finally manage to arrest his momentum. However, he continued to lay on the ground with an agonized expression on his face, looking as if he were unable to get up. Han Li and Liu Xiuye were both quite stunned to see this. They had personally witnessed just how powerful Shi Kun's body was, yet even he had been reduced to such a sorry state after being rammed into by that golden shadow. Just how terrifyingly powerful did that golden shadow have to be to accomplish this? Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he immediately managed to identify what the golden shadow was, upon which he was instantly given a massive fright. This was a dark beast that was around 10 feet in length, with shimmering golden fur and inky black eyes. It was a legendary dark beast monarch. No way. Prior to setting off, he'd said that there was no way they'd be unlucky enough to encounter a dark beast monarch, yet they'd somehow managed to encounter one before they'd even seen a three-eyed dark beast. These dark beast monarchs were the most fearsome beings in this forest, and even though there were no records detailing how powerful they were, they had to at least possess powers comparable to holy race beings. Han Li's heart sank as he came to an abrupt halt, then fixed an intense, unblinking gaze onto the golden dark beast. At the same time, he immediately forged a spiritual connection with several treasures within his body, getting ready to unleash them at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, Liu Xiuye had also stopped on a thick tree branch, appraising the golden dark beast with a grave expression on her face. The dark beast monarch was clearly also rather disoriented from crashing into Shi Kun out of the blue, and after shaking its head from side to side, a vicious light flashed through its eyes as it fixed its gaze on Shi Kun, who was still unable to get up. Sharp claw projections immediately appeared on the front ends of its paws, and it seemed to be preparing to attack Shi Kun. Both Han Li and Liu Xiuye's hearts jolted upon seeing this, and they were contemplating whether to step in or not. It was quite clear that the dark beast monarch hadn't discovered the two of them yet, so if they were to sneak away now, perhaps they'd be able to escape unscathed. Otherwise, even if the three of them could just barely hold off this dark beast monarch, as soon as it summoned more of its brethren to the scene, they'd definitely be plunged into life-threatening danger. However, if Shi Kun were to die, there'd be no way for them to access the restricted ruins, so their mission would end in failure before it had even begun. If they were to fail to complete the mission and allow Shikun to perish in the Dark Beast Forest, they would definitely be punished by Kai Ling and Duan Tianren, even if they could return from the vast glacial realm alive. However, even though this was quite a troublesome prospect, it was something for him to worry about in the future. For now, his top priority was naturally to save himself. Thus, Han Li made his decision in the blink of an eye, before quickly turning to glance at Liu Shuye. However, he discovered that the dark beast that Liu Shuye had turned into was arching its back, and faint white light was shimmering from its body, looking as if it were going to rush to Shikun's aid without any hesitation. This came as quite a surprise to Han Li, and a contemplative look appeared in his eyes. However, he had no intention of risking his life with her. As such, after taking a deep breath, he planned to hurtle back in retreat. However, the events that unfolded next had him completely flabbergasted. The golden dark beast had a ferocious look in its eyes, and it was clearly just about to attack. However, its ears suddenly twitched, following which the vicious look on its face transformed into one of shock and fury. It then let loose a low snarl, and shot forth as a golden shadow again, disappearing into the forest after just a few flashes. Han Li and Liu Shuye couldn't help but exchange a surprised glance upon seeing this. At this moment, Shikun finally struggled slowly to his feet, then transmitted his voice to his two companions in a furious manner. "What's going on? Why would a dark beast monarch appear alone here? I can't believe I was unlucky enough to crash into a dark beast monarch out of the blue. Are you all right, brother Shi?" Liu Shuye transmitted her voice in reply in a concerned manner. "It's all right, my body went completely numb earlier, but I'm much better now," Shikun grumbled, and he really did appear to be fine. Han Li's brows furrowed upon hearing this, yet just as he was about to ask something, the roars of countless beasts suddenly rang out in the distance up ahead. The roars were like rumbling thunder, making their ears ring loudly, and even the nearby trees were trembling violently as if they'd come to life. "What's happening?" Liu Shuye exclaimed. Han Li and Shikun also wore bewildered expressions. However, in the next instant, the roars suddenly cut off, but countless astonishing auras abruptly appeared up ahead before approaching Han Li's trio at a rapid speed. Moments later, all three of them heard an incessant rustling noise, and Han Li's face immediately paled as he hurriedly transmitted his voice to Shikun and Liu Shuye. "Dodge." Immediately thereafter, he rushed toward a nearby tree, then vanished into it amid a flash of azure light. Shikun and Liu Shuye also reacted extremely quickly, springing into action almost as soon as Han Li had issued his warning. Shikun stomped his foot into the ground beneath his feet, and he sank into the soil amid a flash of yellow light. Meanwhile, Liu Shuye opened her mouth to expel a ball of blue light, and she gradually turned transparent within the blue light before disappearing on the spot. Almost as soon as the three of them had taken these evasive measures, black light flashed in the distance, and countless dark beasts surged forth from up ahead. It was as if most of the dark beasts in this entire forest had been gathered here. Han Li was circulating the magic power within his body relentlessly, and after just a few flashes, he'd already fled to several kilometers away. He then turned around and focused his gaze on the scenes unfolding behind him, upon which he discovered that there were many remarkably large dark beasts among this astonishing torrent, and each of them had a vertical eye on their glabella. These were three-eyed dark beasts. They hadn't encountered even a single high-grade dark beast along the way, and it turned out that they'd all been gathered here. As soon as these dark beasts emerged, countless bursts of spiritual sense fanned out in all directions, encompassing an area with a radius of several hundred kilometers. Han Li certainly didn't dare to try his luck in this situation, and black light suddenly flashed from his body, following which a black veil draped itself over him in a flash. This was none other than the mysterious black veil he'd obtained from those two black Rakshasa beings. Immediately thereafter, he opened his mouth to produce a purple talisman before quickly plastering it to himself. A cloud of purple mist intermingled with countless silver runes immediately appeared before encompassing his entire body. His dark beast body then turned completely invisible, but at the same time, he was forced to slow down significantly. At this moment, Han Li cast his gaze toward Shikun and Liu Shuye to find that they were still moving as quickly as ever, and they'd already fled to close to 10 kilometers away. Han Li had chosen to conceal himself as best as he could, whereas Shikun and Liu Shuye were clearly just trying to get as far away as possible before they were detected by the high-grade dark beasts. It was hard to say which method was superior. If the high-grade dark beasts were unable to see through their concealment techniques, then it was naturally best to take advantage of that and get away from this place as quickly as possible. However, if traveling too quickly hampered the effect of their concealment techniques, thereby resulting in their covers being blown, then they'd be in grave danger. The reason why Han Li had chosen to conceal himself while remaining on the spot was because he was confident in the concealment abilities of his high-zenith invisibility talisman and the black veil. The third demonic eyes of the high-grade dark beast scanned through the surrounding area, passing over Han Li, as well as Shi Kun and Liu Xiuye. However, none of their eyes locked onto the trio, so it was quite clear that they hadn't been discovered. Han Li and the others all heaved a long sigh of relief upon seeing this. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly caught sight of something in the beast pack, and he immediately drew a sharp breath as his expression changed drastically. He had discovered an extremely eye-catching shimmering golden shadow among the beast pack. It was another dark beast monarch. However, this one was clearly different from the one they'd just seen. Not only was its body slightly larger, it had 7 or 8 three-eyed dark beasts following closely behind it. On top of that, the third eyes of these high-grade dark beasts weren't gray. Instead, they were shimmering with faint silver light. Aside from the few silver-eyed dark beasts accompanying it, all of the nearby dark beasts immediately retreated to over 100 feet away, clearing out a large area as a gesture of respect for the dark beast monarch. Thus, the entire beast pack stopped cold in their tracks, as all of them either perched on tree branches or stood still on the ground, and all of them were appraising the golden dark beast with awe and veneration in their eyes. The dark beast monarch cast a cold gaze through the surrounding area, following an astonishing aura erupted from its body, crushing the spiritual sense fluctuations of all of the other high-grade dark beasts before sweeping forth in all directions. Han Li's heart sank slightly upon seeing this, and he stopped flying altogether as he hid himself inside a large tree in a completely stationary manner. In the distance, Liu Xiuye and Shi Kun could also sense a massive fluctuation surging toward them, and they immediately tried to withdraw their auras, hoping to be able to escape detection. However, that was clearly overly wishful thinking. Han Li managed to remain undetected even in the face of the Dark Beast Monarch's powerful spiritual sense, but Shi Kun and Liu Xiuye were instantly locked onto. Shi Kun could sense that a cold aura had crept into the spiritual sense around him, and his expression changed drastically as he yelled, "Run!" Yellow light flashed from his body, and he shot forth as a streak of yellow light, making no further attempt to disguise himself. Liu Xiuye was also aware that their situation was far from ideal, and the white jade mouse beneath her appeared in a flash, then formed a ball of light that swept her up and carried her away at an astonishing speed. As such, not only did the golden dark beast notice them, all of the other dark beasts also detected their presence, and a stir immediately ran through the entire beast pack. A cold light flashed through the golden dark beast's inky black eyes, and a baleful aura erupted from its body. It opened its mouth as if it were about to give an order, but all of a sudden, its expression abruptly changed, and it turned toward the direction that the other golden dark beast had fled toward before letting loose a long howl that pierced through the heavens. Not only was the roar extremely loud, it also seemed to possess some kind of incredible power, forcing all of the nearby normal dark beasts to sprawl onto the ground, while even the high-grade dark beasts were swaying unsteadily. Almost right after this howl erupted, a similar cry also rang out in the distance up ahead. The two howls seemed to be quite similar, but if one were to listen closely, they'd discover that the second howl was filled with unbridled fury. As soon as the golden dark beast in the beast pack heard this reciprocating howl, an extremely humanized sinister expression appeared on its face, and at the same time, it abruptly let loose a thunderous low snarl. The entire beast pack immediately sprang into action at its behest, rushing onward again like a massive black wave, and it appeared that they were heading directly toward where the other golden dark beast was. However, the golden dark beast in the beast pack wasn't planning on simply leaving Shi Kun and Liu Xiuye either. It turned around before letting loose a few roars toward the silver-eyed dark beasts around it, and all of them immediately replied with low, respectful roars. Immediately thereafter, they hurtled toward Shi Kun and Liu Xiuye as streaks of silver light, while the golden dark beast joined the beast pack in pursuit of the other dark beast monarch. In the blink of an eye, the beast pack vanished into the distance, and the silver-eyed dark beasts also disappeared in pursuit of their targets. Meanwhile, Han Li remained within the giant tree this entire time, and he only emerged from it after 2 hours had passed, and he'd ascertained that there were no other dark beasts nearby. After that, he deactivated his high zenith invisibility talisman and removed the black veil from his body. Among them, the talisman had a time limit that it was effective for, and even though the black veil appeared to be quite light, it was very draining on his magic power. Hence, he naturally couldn't use these two things all the time. After emerging from within the giant tree, Han Li cast his gaze toward the direction that Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun had fled in, and he contemplated the situation momentarily before heaving a faint sigh. Immediately thereafter, he opened his mouth, and a small azure flying sword flew out from within before transforming into a burst of azure light that enshrouded Han Li's entire body. Thus, Han Li transformed into a streak of azure light that was around 10 feet in length and set off in pursuit of his two companions. Initially, the azure streak of light was quite dazzling to behold, but it quickly dimmed until it became nothing more than a barely visible azure shadow in the end. Han Li was flying through the forest extremely quickly, but he still hadn't caught sight of his targets even after flying for close to half a day. If it weren't for the fact that the three of them had used a secret technique to refine treasures that could allow them to keep track of one another's locations, Han Li would have most likely been drawn into thinking that he'd already lost them. It appeared that Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun were seriously escaping as quickly as they could to get away from their pursuers. Even at Han Li's current speed, he was still unable to close the gap at all. The fact that the silver-eyed dark beasts were able to keep up with them, despite this, indicated that they were certainly not to be scoffed at, either. These thoughts quickly raced through his mind, and he suddenly gritted his teeth before he reverted back to his human form amid a flash of silver light. He stowed the dark beast hide away, then made a hand seal, and a pair of translucent wings appeared on his back following a dull thunderclap. After summoning his thunderstorm wings, Han Li flapped them gently, and his body shot forth as an azure and white thread of light. The light thread covered a distance of 700 to 800 feet in just a single flash, then appeared on the other side of the horizon after just a few more flashes. Such an astonishing speed would allow Han Li to outrun all beings below the holy race, and he was finally beginning to slowly catch up to Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun. Thankfully, all of the dark beasts nearby seemed to have been summoned away by the dark beast monarch, thereby allowing him to fly through the forest without any inhibitions. After more than 2 hours, he finally caught up to his target and caught sight of Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun in the distance. In reality, he hadn't really caught up. At this point, Liu Shuyer and Shi Kun had already been forced to stop and were currently engaged in a heated battle against the silver-eyed dark beasts. Han Li narrowed his eyes and surveyed the situation from several kilometers away. Thus, he discovered that Shi Kun had donned a suit of shimmering yellow armor and was standing still on the spot in midair. Letter 1D4 BB, letter 1D4 5F, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D4 64, letter 1D4 52, letter 1D4 4F, letter 1D4 B8, letter 1D4 5C, letter 1D6 2E. A pair of crimson war hammers had appeared in his hands, and as he swung them through the air, countless fist-sized balls of fire revolved around him, conjuring up a sinister-looking crimson fireworm. In the air above his head, a red jade vial spinning on the spot incessantly, blasting forth pillars of crimson light that were attacking the enemies around him in a frenzy. It turned out that Shi Kun's most powerful abilities were fire attribute ones, rather than earth attribute abilities. This came as quite a surprise to Han Li. Meanwhile, the three silver-eyed dark beasts that were attacking him had conjured up a dozen or so black projections that had surrounded him from all sides. Countless streaks of black and red light clashed amid resounding booms, and despite the immense power of Shi Kun's war hammers, he was unable to strike the silver projections around him due to their fast and unpredictable movement techniques, so he was only able to ensure self-preservation without being able to gain any advantage. On top of that, even though the three silver-eyed dark beasts weren't actually attacking him themselves, the silver beams of light they were unleashing from their third eyes were extremely dangerous. Shi Kun naturally didn't dare to allow these beams of light to pierce through his defenses and strike his body, so he was going out of his way to block them with his war hammers. And Li could clearly see that as soon as those silver beams of light struck Shi Kun's crimson hammers, those areas on the hammers would instantly take on a black hue, despite the fact that the crimson light around those areas would then scramble to sweep over those spots. It would still take a long while before the war hammers returned to normal. Thankfully, the three silver-eyed dark beasts were unable to continuously blast forth those beams of light, and even with 3 of them joining forces to attack Shikun, they were still unable to break through his defenses. Thus, an impasse ensued. Meanwhile, Liu Shuyer was facing 4 other silver-eyed sylve beasts on her own, and her situation was vastly different. She had summoned a set of dazzling silver short spears, each of which was only around a foot in length. There were 8 of them in total, and as they flew through the air, they left specks of silver light in their wake, making it appear as if countless silver stars had lit up in the dark night. Aside from those treasures, a strange silver projection had also appeared behind her. The projection appeared to be of a beautiful silver-armored woman, yet as its arms flashed through the air, they conjured up countless blurry arm projections, making it appear as it possessed hundreds of arms. Each and every one of those arms projection was holding a silver longsword that was just as blurry and indistinct, and these longswords were sending streaks of white sword chi hurtling through the air. As such, countless streaks of sword chi were being unleashed by the projection, while the set of short silver spears were releasing countless specks of silver light, and these attacks encompassed an area with a radius of over 1,000 feet. The 4 silver-eyed dark beasts had flown into a thunderous rage, and the projections they were conjuring up were rushing relentlessly toward Liu Shuyer, only to be kept firmly at bay. As such, she appeared to be well on top in her battle. And Li heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing this, and at the same time, a wry smile appeared on his face. These 2 had proclaimed that they'd have very little chances of securing victory if they were to face more than 3 normal dark beasts, yet right now, they were facing multiple 3-eyed dark beasts, which were of a higher caliber than their normal brethren, yet one was able to hold their own while the other clearly had the upper hand. It was quite apparent that they had both intentionally been overly modest in their own assessment of their powers. However, that came as no surprise to Han Li. After all, no one would reveal the full extent of their powers to some people they'd only just met. The Dark Beast Monarch had to have identified their cultivation bases, but never would it have thought that these 2 weren't ordinary late-spatial tempering stage beings at all. Otherwise, it wouldn't have sent only these 7 silver-eyed dark beasts after them. If they were only comparable in power to normal late-spatial tempering stage beings, there was no way that they'd be able to withstand the combined attacks from these silver-eyed dark beasts for so long. In this current situation, it was impossible to say whether Liu Shuyer was truly more powerful than Shikun, or whether the 7 silver-eyed dark beasts were truly inferior in power compared to the 2 of them. Neither side had unleashed their full power, and the battles appeared to be quite fierce, but all of them were merely throwing figurative jabs, trying to provoke an opening that they could exploit to land a killing blow. Only in those moments of life and death would they reveal the extent of their abilities. However, through the use of his spirit eye ability, Han Li could see that both Shikun and Liu Shuyer wore concerned expressions on their faces. It was no wonder that they were feeling rather uneasy. After all, this was the central region of the Dark Beast Forest. Even though all of the Dark Beasts had seemingly been taken away by the Dark Beast Monarch, who was to say that the Beast Pack wouldn't suddenly turn around. If they were to be inundated by so many Dark Beasts at once, their fates were essentially sealed. However, if they were to try and end these battles quickly, that could easily result in unfavorable consequences as well. These 7 silver-eyed dark beasts were comparable to them in power, so even if they were to unleash all of their trump cards to kill these beasts, they'd expend a lot of magic power in the process, and most likely end up with severe injuries as well. In that case, there was almost no way they'd be able to traverse through the rest of the Dark Beast Forest without being killed along the way. As such, both Liu Shuyer and Shikun were growing quite anxious, and they could only hope that Han Li would catch up to them as quickly as possible. Only with their combined powers would they be able to secure victory without having to overexert themselves. These thoughts quickly raced through Han Li's mind, and he immediately understood the nature of the situation. He knew that these battles had to be concluded quickly, as the longer they delayed, the more risk they'd be incurring. As such, he immediately swept a sleeve through the air, and he turned over his hand to summon an object. He then flicked his wrist, and a black bracelet shot forth, then disappeared into thin air in a flash. At the same time, his other hand turned inky black, and wisps of gray light began to emerge from his fingertips. Simultaneously, golden light flashed, and golden scales appeared all over his body as he immediately activated his Provenance True Devil Arts to their maximal extent. After doing all that, he raised a hand, and a black veil emerged before draping itself over his entire body, upon which he immediately vanished on the spot. Moments later, One of the dark beasts that was attacking Shikun suddenly faltered as a hint of bewilderment flashed through its eyes. Right at this moment, spatial fluctuations erupted behind it, and a white object hurtled directly toward the beast. The silver-eyed dark beast reacted extremely quickly, swiping a paw behind itself without even turning around. Black light flashed, and several black claw projections flashed through the air, crashing into the white object with a resounding boom. The dark beast took advantage of this opportunity to abruptly twist around, and it finally managed to identify what it had just been attacked by. This was a pristine white python that was several tens of feet long, and astonishing glacial chi was emanating from its entire body as it appraised the beast in a completely expressionless manner. The dark beast was naturally furious to see this, yet before it had a chance to do anything, a small mountain that was around an inch tall suddenly appeared above its head. The miniature mountain then swelled drastically to over 1,000 feet in size in the blink of an eye before crashing down in a soundless manner. There were several large silver runes inscribed onto the surface of the mountain, and those characters were none other than beveled silver text. Due to the abrupt and silent emergence of the mountain, the dark beast only detected its presence after it had begun its descent. At this moment, a blue jade fan shot forth from within the giant white python's mouth, and the fan waved itself through the air, sending a burst of blue glacial light hurtling directly toward the dark beast. The silver-eyed dark beast was quite alarmed by these sudden developments, and the other two dark beasts immediately let loose roars of fury upon seeing this, turning away from Shikun as they charged toward their companion. Shikun immediately let loose a burst of raucous laughter as both of his war hammers flew out of his hands, then swelled to around 10 feet in size each before crashing down toward the two dark beasts with devastating might. Even prior to actually making contact with the two beasts, two bursts of immense power came crashing down from the war hammers, and the two beasts could only turn around and blast black light out of their mouths to withstand these lethal attacks. As such, the dark beast beneath the giant mountain had no choice but to face Han Li on its own, and all of its fur immediately stood up on end, then transformed into countless streaks of black light that hurtled directly toward the swath of blue light sweeping toward it. It then raised its head and blasted a thick pillar of black light toward the underside of the giant black mountain. The beast wasn't expecting these rushed attacks to actually be able to keep Han Li's assault at bay. All it wanted was to delay these two attacks slightly, and it was confident that it would be able to escape. In the next instant, black light erupted from the dark beast's body, and it suddenly split up into hundreds of black butterflies that flew forth in all directions. The black pillar of light struck the giant mountain, and the latter really did pause for a split second in its descent. During this brief delay, the black butterflies fled to around 300 feet away, and they were about to leave the area encompassed by the giant mountain in the next instant. However, right at this moment, a cold harumph rang out from nearby. The harumph wasn't very loud, but all of the black butterflies faltered upon hearing it, and they almost fell out of the sky. Almost at the exact same moment, the silver runes on the surface of the giant black mountain lit up, following which countless threads of gray light shot forth from the underside of the mountain. Brilliant gray light flashed as the gray threads instantly pierced through the bodies of the temporarily immobilized black butterflies.